Hey guys, tonight we drift gently into the dim streets and quiet households of ancient Thebes, a city that was once thick with the scent of olive oil, dust, and the faint tang of river water. You probably won't survive a day walking its narrow stone alleys, dodging carts, animals, and the occasional reckless warrior. Yet here we are, not to fight or flee, but to witness the story of Timoclea, a woman whose calm courage carved her name into the whispering corridors of history. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And if you feel like it, drop your location and local time in the comments so we can imagine the world together as it drifts off to sleep. Now, dim the lights. Maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Timoclea lived in a period when Thebes was no stranger to conflict, a city often caught between the ambitions of kings and the whims of soldiers. The city's stone walls, though formidable, could not always protect its citizens from the human ambitions that poured across its gates like water through a sieve. Timoclea, as history whispers, was not a warrior, nor a ruler, nor a poet whose verses reached far beyond her city. She was simply a young woman navigating the daily life of Thebes, which was a blend of simplicity and constant caution. Her home, like most Theban households, was built of sun-baked mud bricks, reinforced with timber where the beams allowed for additional rooms. Floors were uneven but practical, often swept with twigs or soft sand, and the central hearth was more than a place for warmth. It was the heartbeat of the household. Here, the family cooked simple meals, boiled lentils, baked barley bread, and preserved olives and figs for the long seasons when the markets fell silent. It was in such ordinary spaces, filled with mundane rituals and soft domestic hums, that Timoclea first began to understand the precariousness of her world. Education for women in Thebes was often confined to managing the household, the weaving loom, and the social etiquettes of polite life. But even within these limits, clever minds found ways to notice patterns, anticipate human behavior, and survive by quietly observing the movements of men, soldiers, and citizens alike. Timoclea's keen perception was not a formal lesson. It was necessity refined into skill. She learned, early on, that the strength of a household lay not only in bricks and bread, but in the foresight and intuition of those who lived within. Her life took a sharp turn when Thebes found itself under the uneasy gaze of Alexander the Great's campaigns. Soldiers, armed with ambition and expectation, moved through cities, often taking what they wanted, and Timoclea's household was not immune. It was during one such intrusion that her presence of mind would begin to matter far more than her physical strength. Ancient Greek law and military protocol, while nominally protecting women, often collapsed in the presence of invaders. Soldiers could assert control, demand resources, or, in the worst cases, inflict violence. In such a context, clever thinking became survival. Timoclea's encounter with a powerful and reckless soldier could have ended tragically. Yet, she used what might be considered ordinary elements, her knowledge of human behavior, her understanding of the soldier's ego, and the subtle cues of timing, to turn a perilous situation to her advantage. It was not through confrontation or physical combat, but through observation, patience, and a deep understanding of psychology. She noted the arrogance in his steps, the predictable sequences in his demands, and the way even the strongest men often overestimated their control when they believed they held absolute power. The streets of Thebes, lined with pottery stalls, olive presses, and narrow alleys, became a theatre of cautious movement. Every action, every word, every gesture carried weight. Timoclea learned to measure her responses, timing them with precision, so that her actions appeared compliant, even harmless, while quietly laying the groundwork for her eventual reprieve. This approach was neither flashy nor heroic, in a conventional sense. It was, however, profoundly effective, and it revealed a truth often hidden in history, that survival sometimes relies on the quiet, seemingly insignificant decisions that ripple into monumental outcomes. At night, the city of Thebes was cloaked in soft shadows, the kind that blurred the edges of reality and allowed for moments of reflection. Timoclea, within the confines of her household, likely considered the limits of her control and the nature of power itself. The human mind, as she would have understood instinctively, is easily distracted by certainty and easily lulled by the apparent order of things. She, in contrast, moved in subtle ways, listening to conversations, noting schedules, and predicting behavior patterns. Such attentiveness was not just cleverness, it was a lifeline. Her story, as preserved in fragments by historians like Plutarch, does not focus on grand speeches or dramatic battles. Instead, it records the result of a quiet, deliberate series of decisions. The accounts emphasize her intelligence and calm demeanor, portraying her as a figure who used her wits rather than force. It is a narrative that stands out in a world often dominated by men wielding swords, by kings issuing edicts, and by soldiers marching in relentless pursuit of ambition. Timoclea's power was the subtlety of the human mind, a lesson in observation, patience, and the delicate calibration of action. And yet, as we drift through her story, there is a question that lingers in the spaces between historical notes. How did a single individual's careful planning intersect with the unpredictable nature of human ambition to produce a moment of survival? What were the unnoticed variables, the tiny gestures, the fleeting choices that tipped the balance in her favor? History records the outcome, but the quiet suspense of those moments, the almost imperceptible pauses and shifts in behavior, is left to our imagination. Would Timoclea have succeeded had her timing been slightly off? Could a single misstep, a delayed glance, or a poorly chosen word have changed everything? And in those moments, as she navigated between danger and opportunity, what thoughts filled her mind? Were they practical considerations of escape, reflections on justice, or simple, human calculations of fear and hope? Her story, at this juncture, remains tantalizingly incomplete. The threads of ordinary life, human psychology, and political chaos are interwoven in ways that leave much to be speculated upon, and it is precisely in this space, between the recorded actions and the unknown intentions, that her tale teaches us the quiet power of careful observation and thoughtful response. Timoclea's first steps towards survival, then, are not marked by dramatic gestures or heroic confrontation. They are measured, subtle, and profoundly human. They remind us that history is often shaped not by the grandiose or the obvious, but by the small, deliberate choices made by those who observe keenly and act wisely. Her narrative invites us to consider the ordinary moments that become extraordinary under pressure and to reflect on how understanding human behavior can be as powerful a tool as any sword or shield. And so, as we pause in the cool shadows of ancient Thebes, there remains one unresolved thought that hangs delicately in the evening air. How exactly would Timoclea transform this quiet intelligence into action? What sequence of subtle, calculated moves would lead to her eventual moment of reckoning, and ultimately, survival? As the city of Thebes settled into the muted rhythms of evening, the air carried a mixture of earthy scents, dried herbs from nearby gardens, the faint tang of river water, and the smoke of countless hearths wending down after the day's cooking. In these quiet moments, Timoclea's mind was already weaving through possibilities, tracing patterns of human behavior, as carefully as a spider traces the threads of her web. The soldier who had entered her household, unaware of the mental trap that was slowly forming, was moving according to predictable impulses, and she was learning to anticipate each step without raising alarm. Her initial compliance was crucial. Timoclea understood that overt defiance would have been dangerous, perhaps fatal. Instead, she used small gestures, lowered eyes, measured speech, subtle nods that conveyed acquiescence. In the same way that Theban merchants arranged their wares to entice customers without overexertion, she arranged her behavior to maintain calm while quietly assessing the environment. Every detail mattered: the tilt of a head, the pause in a sentence, the way a hand rested on a countertop. These tiny signals conveyed safety to the intruder, while allowing her mind to chart the larger strategy. Timoclea's acute observation extended beyond the soldier's immediate actions. She noted the layout of her home, the position of furniture, the weak points in doorways, and the potential tools that could aid her if opportunity struck. The household itself became a landscape of possibilities. A simple chest, a loosely woven basket, or even a small pile of clay pots could serve as cover, distraction, or leverage. Every object, previously overlooked in the rhythm of daily life, became part of a larger tactical map, waiting to be activated at the precise moment. Even as she planned, Timoclea had to navigate the psychology of fear and authority. Soldiers, accustomed to unquestioned dominance, often acted with a mixture of arrogance and impatience. Timoclea understood this and exploited it subtly. She allowed him to believe he controlled the situation entirely while planting the seeds of overconfidence. The human tendency to underestimate quiet minds works in favor of those who observe patiently, and she relied on this natural flaw in judgment to extend the duration of her safety. The evening stretched on, marked by muted conversations and the occasional creak of timber in the house. Outside, the city settled into a lull, the distant footsteps of late wanderers echoing along the cobblestones. Timoclea's focus was inward, a careful balance between patience and preparation. In moments like these, the ordinary details of domestic life, folding cloth, grinding grain, drawing water from the cistern, became a kind of meditation, a way to maintain composure while her mind orchestrated the steps that might ensure survival. And then an opportunity presented itself. The soldier, confident that he understood the dynamics of control, allowed a moment of overextension. Perhaps it was a pause to inspect his surroundings, perhaps a lapse in attention as he assumed compliance guaranteed his safety. Timoclea, who had been observing every microgesture, recognized this moment as the critical window. With the calm precision of someone accustomed to watching patterns in nature, the slow sway of trees, the predictable flight of birds, she prepared her response. This preparation was not dramatic. There was no sudden leap or cry. Rather, it was an alignment of timing, the convergence of observation and instinct. She had noted the exact location of a sturdy chest, the way a clay jar could be nudged without noise, the angle at which she could pivot her body. Every choice was calculated, with contingencies for error. The careful orchestration of these small decisions created a scenario in which the apparent randomness of survival was in fact a meticulously arranged plan. Timoclea's approach can be understood as a study in psychological leverage. She recognized the soldier's expectations and subtly altered them without his awareness. By maintaining a calm demeanor, she encouraged him to act predictably. By allowing minor inconsistencies, hesitations, shifts in posture, fleeting expressions of concern, she introduced uncertainty without revealing her intentions. The interplay of control and submission, of anticipation and reaction, became a delicate dance, one that required constant attention and measured movement. Her actions were grounded not in heroics but in patience, patience amplified by acute, situational awareness. History often remembers the dramatic, the large-scale victories or battles, but in the quiet alleys and private rooms of Thebes, survival depended on the nuances of behavior and the ability to read human tendencies. Timoclea embodied this principle. She converted ordinary attentiveness into extraordinary influence, demonstrating that mental acuity could rival physical strength or authority. The strategy reached its critical juncture when the soldier, lulled by her apparent compliance, committed fully to a movement that exposed his vulnerability. Timoclea, seizing the moment, acted with the precision of someone who had rehearsed the sequence endlessly in her mind. The execution was swift, almost imperceptible, yet it contained the cumulative effect of hours of careful observation. It is in this quiet, almost invisible action that her story diverges from typical accounts of conquest and subjugation. Here, intellect and timing create a resolution without the need for overt confrontation. Even after the immediate danger passed, Timoclea's reflection on the event underscores the subtlety of her triumph. There was no grand proclamation, no immediate celebration. The city remained as it had been, with its muted sounds, its lingering sense of bread and herbs, and the quiet flicker of evening lamps. Yet within her, a transformation had occurred. The ordinary had been leveraged into extraordinary survival. Her intelligence, patience, and observation had navigated her through a situation where others might have faltered. The broader context is equally fascinating. Timoclea's actions occurred within a society structured around hierarchies, gender roles, and formalized notions of power. Her success, subtle, precise, and largely invisible to the public eye, demonstrates how individuals could operate within these structures to assert influence and secure survival. This interplay between personal ingenuity and societal constraints is a theme that resonates far beyond ancient Thebes, reminding us that history often turns on the quiet actions of perceptive individuals. And yet, as we follow her story, a question persists, one that historians can only speculate upon. What were the internal calculations and emotions that guided her decisions in those moments of tension? Fear, anticipation, hope, and perhaps even a form of detached analysis, all mingled in the background of her mind. How did she reconcile the potential for catastrophic failure with the need for deliberate action? The historical record does not provide explicit answers, leaving us to imagine the inner life of a woman who quietly, methodically, outmaneuvered danger in a way that became legend. The significance of Timoclea's strategy lies not only in her immediate survival, but in the subtle ways her story illuminates the functioning of power, perception, and human psychology in ancient Greece. Her example encourages reflection on the ordinary choices that can have extraordinary consequences, and on the ways in which quiet observation often shapes the outcomes of seemingly perilous situations. And as we linger in the aftermath of these events, another question arises, extending the narrative forward. How did her actions influence the broader environment of Thebes, the perception of women, and the understanding of intelligence as a form of power? The resolution is not yet complete, and the story is poised to explore the ultimate consequences of Timoclea's cleverness. The night in Thebes settled like a velvet curtain, muffling the distant clatter of soldiers' boots and the soft murmurs of households tucked away in the narrow alleys. For Timoclea, the tension of the earlier encounter had not dissipated entirely. The city itself, with its stone walls and flickering lamps, felt like a silent witness to the delicate orchestration she had executed. Her mind, however, now turned from immediate survival to understanding the broader significance of her actions. She had not only preserved her life, but demonstrated a subtle, yet profound lesson about human behavior, power, and strategy, lessons that history would quietly preserve, even if only in fragments. Timoclea's decisive moment had relied on a mixture of timing, psychology, and the physical layout of her home. By leveraging seemingly mundane objects, a chest, a clay jar, a doorway, she created a scenario in which the soldier's arrogance became his own undoing. Each movement had been calculated to appear accidental, yet the orchestration required deep foresight. In a sense, she transformed ordinary household items into instruments of strategy, a principle that seems almost comically understated, but was vital for her survival. It is worth considering the soldier's perspective, though details remain sparse. From his point of view, the encounter had likely felt controlled and predictable. Yet, the very human tendency to underestimate those perceived as weaker or subordinate led him into a trap invisible to him. Timoclea's understanding of this cognitive bias, the tendency of people in positions of authority to misjudge compliance as passivity, was a cornerstone of her approach. The quiet, deliberate application of such insight allowed her to neutralize a much stronger and better armed opponent without violence in the conventional sense. After the immediate danger passed, the psychological aftermath for Timoclea and her household would have been profound, even if not dramatic. Ancient Greek society often left women with little formal recourse in moments of threat. But Timoclea had effectively carved her own space of autonomy. By exploiting the nuances of behavior, timing, and environment, she had achieved a resolution that traditional societal structures might not have provided. Her triumph lay not in visibility or recognition, but in the quiet assertion of intelligence over brute force. The story, as it has reached us through the historical record, also reflects broader cultural values. The Greeks, particularly in classical texts, admired cleverness and prudence, often portraying such traits in the lives of mythic or semi-historical figures. Timoclea fits into this tradition. She is neither a goddess nor a soldier, yet her intellect and moral composure render her worthy of remembrance. In the shadow of battles and political upheavals, the narrative of a woman who uses strategy rather than strength resonates with a subtle, almost meditative power, illustrating how ordinary individuals could navigate extraordinary circumstances. This narrative also offers insight into the texture of daily life in Thebes. Consider the household she inhabited: the mud, brick walls that held the aroma of cooking, the hearth that provided warmth and sustenance, the clay jars and woven baskets arranged in carefully considered order. These elements, mundane though they may seem, became part of her strategic canvas. Her ability to perceive opportunity in the ordinary underscores a lesson often overlooked in history. Survival is as much about awareness of one's surroundings as it is about action. And yet, while her cleverness ensured her immediate safety, the broader consequences of her actions ripple outward, touching the city, its inhabitants, and, in subtle ways, the cultural memory of women in ancient Greece. Stories of clever women who used intellect, patience, and observation to navigate danger appeared sporadically in literature and oral tradition. Timoclea's legacy lies in this quiet resonance, in the example she set for understanding human behavior and exercising agency under constraints. Her story challenges the assumption that power is only held by those with physical strength or formal authority. It suggests that strategic thinking, observation, and self-control can alter the balance of a situation profoundly. Moreover, her encounter raises questions about justice and human morality. The soldier's arrogance, unchecked and presumed to be absolute, collided with Timoclea's quiet insight. The resulting outcome, where intellect prevailed over aggression, hints at a primitive form of poetic justice, one that is gentle in its execution yet compelling in its lesson. It is a reminder that history often records not only the great battles and decrees of kings, but also the subtle, intelligent acts of ordinary individuals that ripple into legacy. In contemplating the final moments of Timoclea's confrontation, one can imagine a careful alignment of breath, gaze, and movement, each calibrated to the smallest observable behavior. Her decisions were not made in isolation. They were informed by an intimate understanding of her environment, the social dynamics at play, and the psychology of the man before her. The success of this strategy depended upon maintaining calm, projecting compliance, and exploiting small windows of vulnerability, a delicate equilibrium that many could not achieve under pressure. The impact of her actions extended beyond the immediate encounter. In the following days, the city would have continued its rhythms, with merchants sweeping their stalls, children chasing each other along the cobbled streets, and women attending to weaving and cooking. Timoclea herself would have returned to her domestic duties, the ordinary rhythm of life providing cover for her quiet triumph. Yet beneath this apparent normalcy, there existed a profound recognition that intelligence, patience, and foresight could shape outcomes as effectively as swords and spears. This reflection brings forward an essential aspect of her story. The ordinary moments of life, often overlooked, are fertile ground for extraordinary acts. Timoclea's preparation, her attention to detail, her keen observation, and her patience was cultivated through the mundane: sweeping the floor, arranging pottery, observing the comings and goings of her neighborhood. These routine actions provided the practice, the mental discipline, and the understanding of human behavior that made her survival possible. History, in recording her story, elevates these ordinary observations into examples of strategic brilliance. Yet, even as we recognize the culmination of her cleverness, the narrative leaves us with lingering contemplation. What were the long-term effects of her actions on the social fabric of Thebes? Did the soldier's failure alter perceptions among his peers, subtly changing the behavior of those who might underestimate women? How did Timoclea herself internalize the experience, carrying forward the lessons of observation and patience into the remaining years of her life? These questions remain unanswered in the historical record, inviting reflection and meditation. Ultimately, Timoclea's story is a quiet testament to the power of the human mind in ordinary circumstances. It reminds us that even in worlds dominated by strength and hierarchy, intelligence and patience can yield extraordinary outcomes. Her narrative does not conclude with fanfare or dramatic celebration. Instead, it leaves a gentle imprint, a quiet echo of wit and observation that persists through centuries. And as we close this chapter of her life, we are left with one final thought. The world is often shaped not only by those who wield power openly, but also by those who navigate constraints with subtlety and insight. Timoclea's careful orchestration of events, her delicate calibration of action and observation, and her ultimate triumph remind us that survival, influence, and legacy are often the product of quiet intelligence exercised in ordinary spaces. The story of Timoclea ends with a gentle reflection on human resilience. She demonstrates that awareness, patience, and strategic thought can create profound outcomes, even in moments of extreme vulnerability. History, in preserving her tale, offers us the serene satisfaction of knowing that ordinary actions, observed with care and executed with precision, can ripple outward in ways that endure far beyond the immediate moment. With that, her tale softly closes, but the lessons remain. How might the principles Timoclea applied to survive in Thebes be recognized in other forgotten corners of history, in lives quietly lived under pressure, in ordinary moments that quietly shift the course of events? It is in pondering such questions that her story transcends its era, offering us, tonight, the comforting reminder that intelligence, patience, and keen observation are timeless allies. The streets of Thebes were narrow and uneven, lined with mud, brick houses that had been baked golden in the relentless sun, dirt paths threaded between the homes, worn smooth in places where feet and hooves passed daily. Morning light would strike the clay walls at odd angles, illuminating the faded colors of painted designs that were intended to ward off evil or simply decorate a well-loved home. The city, while fortified with stone walls and watchtowers, depended on its citizens' routines to function. And those routines were precise, repetitive, and unforgiving to anyone unfamiliar with the rhythms of daily life. Women began their days before sunrise, tending fires in the hearths that warmed their houses and prepared meals for the household. Boiling grains, baking flatbreads, and grinding legumes was a slow, rhythmic process, requiring attention and patience. Tools were simple stone mortars, wooden pestles, and clay pots that were sometimes cracked but still serviceable. Each movement of food preparation demanded care. A spill could mean wasted rations, and rations were finite. Children, if they were not helping with chores, ran barefoot in the alleys, dodging carts and animals, while imitating the adults they watched intently. Men, depending on their occupation, followed routines of labor and trade. Farmers tended fields outside the city walls, coaxing wheat, barley, and vegetables from the thin, rocky soil. Shepherds guided flocks across rolling hills, their voices carrying commands to animals trained to respond to subtle cues. Craftsmen, from potters to carpenters, labored in workshops that smelled of wet clay, sawdust, or molten bronze. The city's economy depended on their precision. One misfired pot or improperly measured loaf could have lasting consequences. Evening brought its own set of responsibilities. The streets, once bustling, quieted as families returned home. Fires glowed in small hearths, illuminating the textures of woven mats, clay jars, and wooden furniture. The rhythmic tasks of weaving, mending garments, and grinding grain filled the air with soft sounds. The swish of fibers, the tap of wooden tools, the scrape of stone against grain. These sounds were the heartbeat of Thebes, the invisible pulse that held daily life together. Water was carried from wells or cisterns, often long distances from the household. Women balanced heavy jars on their shoulders, moving with a careful gait to avoid spillage. Access to water was a measured, ongoing concern. One careless drop could mean rationing for days. Waste management was rudimentary. Wastewater flowed into shallow drains, and refuse was often piled at the edges of streets, to be collected by the few who specialized in sanitation. The stench of refuse mingled with cooking smells, creating a persistent sensory backdrop that city dwellers simply adapted to over time. The social structures of Thebes also dictated behavior in subtle, constant ways. Every interaction followed expected norms, from greetings to the handling of goods in the marketplace. Failure to observe these conventions could result in ridicule, exclusion, or worse, loss of livelihood. Children were taught obedience and skill from a young age. They learned to anticipate the flow of daily routines and the consequences of disruption. Their play often mirrored adult activities, from small mock trades to elaborate games imitating battles and household tasks, embedding lessons of survival and societal expectation. Markets were centers of both commerce and social observation. Vendors called out their wares in repetitive, practiced rhythms.
Fresh olives! Dried figs!
Barley bread still warm from the oven. Buyers approached with careful negotiation, often counting coins or measuring goods with exacting attention. The economy of daily life was slow, meticulous, and unforgiving. A merchant's reputation for accuracy and fairness could make or break years of work, and mistakes were remembered and whispered about for months. Food preparation extended beyond mere sustenance. It was also a mechanism for social cohesion. Families prepared meals that balanced what was available with ritual significance. Bread, grains, legumes, olives, and small amounts of cheese constituted daily nutrition, while occasional additions of fruits, honey, or fish marked celebrations or special occasions. Cooking was measured, precise, and often laborious, requiring both foresight and knowledge of seasonal availability. A missed harvest or poorly preserved jar could mean weeks of scarcity, making every daily task critical to survival. The rhythms of labor extended into leisure, though leisure was limited and often functional. Music, dancing, and storytelling were brief, periodic respites from the unyielding responsibilities of the household. Even these moments served practical purposes. Songs passed down knowledge, tales instructed on proper behavior, and dances reinforced communal cohesion. The entertainment of the Theban citizen was not frivolous. It was a mechanism of continuity, a way to transmit culture and expectation through generations. The city also imposed constraints on movement and safety. Walls and gates offered protection against external threats, yet internal dangers persisted. Disputes between neighbors, petty thefts, and occasional violence punctuated the rhythms of life, requiring vigilance and social acuity. Knowledge of one's surroundings, the habits of fellow citizens, and the timing of events was critical. A single lapse in attention could compromise safety or disrupt the delicate balance of social and economic exchange. Religion and ritual were interwoven into these routines. Families maintained small household altars, offering incense, food, or drink to gods and spirits believed to influence daily life. Public ceremonies and festivals brought communities together, reinforcing social bonds and shared belief systems. The participation in these rituals was not merely spiritual, it was also a practical means of maintaining favor with authority figures, neighbors, and divine forces, all of which had subtle influence over personal security and social standing. The rhythm of survival in Thebes demanded constant attention to the ordinary. Every movement, from sweeping floors to trading goods, carried potential consequences. Timoclea herself, though known later for her cleverness, was shaped in this environment. Observing the flow of daily life, understanding the subtle cues of human behavior, and predicting outcomes based on routine and habit were skills embedded through mundane activity. Her later actions, which historians remember, were extensions of these lessons learned in the ordinary textures of Theban life. Even the mundane challenges of the city required foresight. Storage of food and water, the repair of walls, the tending of small gardens, and the maintenance of tools all demanded planning and attention. Households that neglected these routines faced discomfort, scarcity, or even collapse. The ordinary citizen's life was a constant balance between labor, observation, and preparation. And it is in this repetition, this seemingly boring attention to detail, that Thebes sustained itself and allowed remarkable stories like Timoclea's to emerge. The sensory experience of life in Thebes was also integral to survival. Dust rose from streets during the day, stirred by the passage of animals and carts. The tang of river water, the smoke of hearths, and the scent of food permeated homes and public spaces alike. Sounds, the clatter of pottery, the murmur of voices, the distant toll of bells or drums, formed a continuous backdrop, shaping perception and attention. Awareness of these elements was critical. They provided signals of approaching danger, the arrival of merchants, or the timing of market activity. Even the smallest details mattered. The tilt of a door, the creak of floorboards, the positioning of a jar on a shelf. These could reveal who had passed through a room, whether someone was hiding, or if an intruder had entered. Such attentiveness, often cultivated from childhood, became instinctive. It was precisely this ability to notice the mundane and draw significance from it that later allowed figures like Timoclea to anticipate danger and act decisively in critical moments. By nightfall, Thebes would settle into relative quiet, though the city never truly slept. Fires flickered behind closed shutters, shadows moved across walls, and the occasional watchman patrolled streets. The routines of the day faded into memory, but their patterns persisted, shaping expectations and behaviors for the following morning. The ordinary cycle of life, from dawn to dusk, wove a web of predictability, opportunity, and constraint. And yet, one cannot help but wonder, as we trace these daily routines, how did ordinary citizens navigate the unpredictable elements that disrupted even the most careful planning? Flooded streets, sudden illness, theft, or political upheaval could upend the rhythm of daily life. Within these ordinary routines, the seeds of both survival and failure were planted, and the true test of human skill, patience, and foresight often revealed itself in subtle, quiet ways. The morning sun crept over Thebes once more, casting long, pale streaks across the uneven streets. Life in the city resumed with its habitual rhythm. Merchants opened their stalls, clanging small coins to attract attention, while the smell of baking bread drifted from multiple households, mingling with the ever-present scent of dust and river water. Timoclea, like many Thebans, had long internalized the cadence of these hours, moving through her home and neighborhood with the ease of someone who had learned to read the city as a living, breathing organism. Food preparation remained central to survival and social stability. Every household had its designated tasks: grinding grain, kneading dough, boiling legumes, preserving olives, and occasionally preparing fish or small cuts of meat. These chores were repetitive yet demanding. Mistimed cooking could result in spoiled bread or undercooked meals, which, in turn, might force a family into rationing. The meticulous measurement of ingredients, the timing of fires, and the careful observation of cooking implements, pots, ladles, and clay ovens, were all essential. Such ordinary attention prevented small failures from cascading into larger crises. Timoclea's observation skills, honed through these daily chores, extended naturally to the social fabric around her. Markets, while bustling with noise, followed a subtle choreography. Stall placement, the order of customer approach, and even the tone of a vendor's call were cues to behavior and potential opportunity. A seasoned observer could predict which merchants were honest, which neighbors were cautious, and which strangers posed a risk. These insights were critical. They determined the timing of interactions, the negotiation of goods, and the avoidance of petty disputes. Even the act of walking through the city required attentiveness. Streets were narrow, uneven, and often cluttered with debris or stray animals. A careless step could result in injury or a delayed arrival, which could disrupt planned exchanges or errands. Children wove through the crowd, both learning and testing limits, while elderly citizens relied on familiar paths to move safely from home to market. Each resident's movement was a delicate interplay of personal intention, social expectation, and environmental hazard. Mastery of these subtleties was often the difference between smooth daily life and repeated misfortune. Household maintenance extended beyond cleaning and cooking. Roof repairs, wall reinforcement, and tool care were routine yet essential. The Theban sun and seasonal rains tested mud brick structures, and neglect could cause partial collapses or leaks, impacting both safety and comfort. Timoclea's family, like many others, treated maintenance as continuous work rather than sporadic labor. A cracked roof tile or weakened doorway could not only allow weather damage, but also create vulnerability to theft or intrusion. Careful observation of these physical details became as important as understanding social cues or market dynamics. Water management in Thebes was a subtle science of foresight. Carrying water from wells or cisterns was laborious, but timing and measurement were critical. Families rationed water for drinking, cooking, and cleaning, often calculating daily consumption to avoid shortages. Storage vessels, usually clay jars, had to be placed to prevent spillage and contamination. Even minor miscalculations in water usage could compound over weeks, affecting health and daily labor. Timoclea, in observing her household's routines, would have absorbed these lessons deeply, understanding the importance of foresight and methodical planning. Trade, both within the city and with nearby settlements, added another layer of complexity. Merchants transported goods via river and road, negotiating tolls, bribing officials, and managing fluctuating demand. Citizens relied on predictable exchanges for essential items, from grain to olive oil, and disruptions in trade could ripple through daily life. Observing patterns of arrival and scarcity was essential. Knowing which traders brought certain goods at which times allowed households to plan, stock, and allocate resources effectively. These small attentions, though unremarkable to outsiders, were vital to sustained survival. Social hierarchy shaped every interaction, subtly but persistently. Citizens knew their place in the civic structure, and deviations could be socially costly. Women and children were expected to maintain household order, while men engaged in trade, military duties, or public service. Servants and laborers navigated hierarchies through obedience, attentiveness, and anticipation of employer expectations. Timoclea's awareness of these dynamics, refined through observation, prepared her for future encounters where understanding human behavior, hierarchy, and timing would be life-saving. Religious practice threaded through these routines with quiet persistence. Small household altars and local shrines provided regular rituals, offering incense, food, or drink to gods and spirits. These acts were not merely symbolic. They created a sense of structure, control, and continuity in a world subject to unpredictable events like drought, disease, or invasion. Participation reinforced social cohesion, provided moral guidance, and established a framework for interpreting events beyond one's control. Observing who participated, how they participated, and when rituals occurred offered subtle insights into community behavior and expectations. Even leisure and play, though infrequent, reflected a practical blend of education and entertainment. Children imitated adult work and social interactions, games mirrored market negotiation or agricultural labor, and stories conveyed moral and practical lessons. The rhythm of daily life, interspersed with moments of communal interaction, built an intuitive understanding of both social and physical environments. Timoclea, observing these patterns, likely absorbed them as part of her own cognitive toolkit, using play, repetition, and reflection as preparation for the unexpected challenges of adult life. Health and hygiene were ongoing concerns. Bathing occurred when water was available, and ailments, from minor cuts to chronic illness, required careful attention. Knowledge of medicinal herbs, dietary adjustments, and routine care was transmitted through family, neighbors, and local healers. Even seemingly trivial measures, like ensuring proper ventilation, cleaning cooking implements, or tending small injuries promptly, could prevent complications that might disrupt daily labor or survival. Mastery of these practices distinguished those who thrived from those who struggled under the pressures of daily Theban life. Security remained an omnipresent, though subtle concern. While Thebes' walls defended against large-scale threats, internal vigilance was constant. Theft, disputes, and occasional violence required citizens to maintain awareness of strangers, neighbors, and even household members. Observation of movement, timing, and behavior could reveal intentions, allowing proactive responses. This was not heroism in the traditional sense, but a quiet, daily strategy for maintaining stability and safety. Through these ordinary routines, a pattern emerges. Survival in Thebes was less about dramatic heroics and more about careful attention, timing, and adaptability. Each action, cooking, trading, observing, maintaining, and participating in rituals, contributed to a larger matrix of interdependent activities. Failure in one area could cascade into difficulty in another, emphasizing the importance of continuous engagement with the mundane, often overlooked details of life. And yet, even in the predictability of daily routines, uncertainty persisted. Flooded streets, delayed shipments, illness, or social disputes could disrupt the most carefully calibrated plans. The ability to anticipate, adapt, and respond, skills cultivated through ordinary labor and observation, was essential. It is in these ordinary responses to minor disruptions that the seeds of extraordinary outcomes, like Timoclea's later survival, are planted. As night approached, households closed shutters, lit lamps, and reviewed the day's successes and failures. Tasks completed, fires tended, children settled, and water stored. The city settled into quiet vigilance, aware that tomorrow would demand the same careful attention to rhythm, routine, and human behavior. And within this pattern, one can reflect on a quiet, but essential truth: the ordinary structures of life, observed and mastered with patience, were the invisible architecture of survival, laying the foundation for the moments of subtle brilliance that history remembers. The unresolved thought lingers. How did ordinary Thebans, like Timoclea before her famous encounter, mentally map this complex interplay of labor, observation, and human behavior? And how did such preparation unknowingly equip them for the extraordinary moments of crisis to come? Nightfall in Thebes wrapped the city in a quiet, contemplative hush, the streets dimly lit by flickering lamps and hearth fires. The routine rhythms of daytime labor were replaced by reflective, measured tasks, checking storage, tending small fires, ensuring children were settled, and reviewing the day's work. These small, deliberate actions created a sense of control within a city that, while fortified, remained vulnerable to both human and environmental unpredictability. The ordinary lives of citizens, often unnoticed by history, formed the backbone of the city's resilience. The domestic sphere remained central to stability and survival. Families prioritized food storage and water management as constant concerns. Clay jars were carefully cleaned, refilled, and rotated to prevent spoilage. Grains were inspected for pests, mold, or moisture. Even minor oversights could accumulate into serious consequences, as rationing and scarcity dictated daily life. Attention to these mundane details was as vital to the security of households as the city's walls and soldiers. Household members often employed subtle strategies to navigate interpersonal relationships within their homes and neighborhoods. Cooperation, observation, and negotiation became critical tools. Disputes over shared resources, water, grain, or firewood, required delicate mediation. A child's obedience, a servant's attentiveness, and even the allocation of tasks among adults could prevent tension from escalating. These interactions, though ordinary, cultivated skills of diplomacy and foresight that could later prove essential in more extraordinary circumstances. Beyond the household, public life demanded vigilance and subtlety. Streets, though quieter at night, still held potential hazards: theft, accidents, or unanticipated visitors. Citizens were trained to recognize patterns of movement and behavior, using observation to anticipate risk. A merchant returning home late might notice the misalignment of a neighbor's shutter, or the unusual positioning of a cart as signals of theft or other disturbances. These everyday attentions, repetitive yet precise, became second nature, forming a cognitive map of the city and its rhythms. Religious practice threaded through evening routines as a form of both personal reflection and social continuity. Small offerings at household altars, grains, wine, or incense, were performed with meticulous care, observing the timing, placement, and types of offerings in neighboring homes provided citizens with subtle insights into social hierarchy, personal wealth, and communal priorities. The spiritual and practical intertwined, reinforcing both internal discipline and social cohesion. The physical maintenance of homes continued into evening hours. Repairs to doors, roofs, and walls were often minor, but critical. A loose tile, a sagging shutter, or a cracked jar could compromise comfort and security. Timoclea and her peers understood the importance of preventing small failures from cascading into larger issues. Every action, however repetitive or seemingly trivial, contributed to the household's stability and, by extension, the city's resilience. Health and hygiene remained an ongoing, understated concern. Cuts, burns, and minor infections could compromise daily labor if not tended promptly. Knowledge of medicinal herbs, poultices, and simple remedies passed from generation to generation, integrated into the routines of care. Monitoring the condition of water, food, and household cleanliness was vital. Even small lapses could create vulnerabilities that compounded over time. Ordinary diligence, practiced consistently, became a quiet defense against illness and misfortune. The city's social hierarchy influenced nightly routines as well. Observation of neighbors' behavior, who was active late, who closed their shutters early, who maintained certain rituals, allowed residents to interpret social norms, identify allies or threats, and adjust their own actions accordingly. Such attentiveness provided both practical safety and the ability to participate successfully in the social fabric. Awareness of subtle behavioral cues, timing, and ritual practice was indispensable, cultivating the same observational skills that would later define strategic success in critical moments. Trade and resource management also shaped evening activities. Merchants completed daily accounts, organized goods, and planned for the next day's exchanges. Households monitored supplies, anticipating shortages or potential disruptions. These tasks demanded attention to detail, arithmetic skill, and foresight, reinforcing mental discipline cultivated through daily repetition. The rhythm of trade, though repetitive, maintained the city's functioning and resilience. Leisure and social interaction, while limited, offered additional lessons in observation and subtle influence. Music, storytelling, and communal gatherings encouraged attentiveness to narrative, nuance, and timing. Even play, particularly among children, reinforced understanding of social roles and human behavior. Timoclea, absorbing these lessons throughout her youth, cultivated an intuition for anticipating actions and outcomes, a skill that would later enable her to navigate extraordinary circumstances with calm precision. Environmental awareness remained a constant part of evening life. Winds carried scents and sounds across the city, signaling changes in weather or the presence of strangers. Observation of light, shadow, and movement enabled citizens to anticipate threats or opportunities. These perceptual skills were woven seamlessly into daily practice, shaping decisions large and small. They also created the foundation for more extraordinary applications of strategy, illustrating how ordinary attentiveness underpins exceptional moments of foresight and survival. By night's end, households prepared for rest while remaining vigilant for potential disturbances. Fires were tended, doors secured, and essential items placed within reach. The interplay of routine, observation, and preparation created a dynamic balance, a city functioning largely through ordinary diligence, yet ready to respond to the unpredictable demands of life. Timoclea's later actions, remembered for their ingenuity, were rooted in this very structure of attentiveness, patience, and foresight cultivated through ordinary daily life. The patterns of Theban life reveal a subtle truth. Survival depended on the mastery of mundane details, continuous observation, and thoughtful planning. Even minor lapses could cascade into larger problems, while consistent diligence provided the stability from which extraordinary outcomes emerged. The ordinary, observed and practiced meticulously, became a training ground for the extraordinary. And as these daily routines unfolded, one can ponder the hidden influence of such ordinary attentiveness. How many remarkable acts of survival, strategy, or insight in ancient cities were quietly incubated in the repetition of chores, observation of social patterns, and care for household and community? Timoclea's story, remembered because of a particular moment of clever action, is only one manifestation of skills cultivated over a lifetime of ordinary routines. Routines that shaped not just individuals, but the resilience and subtle intelligence of entire communities. Timoclea's household, like many in Thebes, was built of sun-baked mud bricks, each wall retaining the faint warmth of the midday sun. The floors were compacted earth, smoothed over years of sweeping, carrying the faint imprint of countless footsteps. Pots and jars lined shelves, each with a purpose, storing grains, olives, and water. In this ordinary setting, she moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who understood the weight of every gesture, every choice, and every glance. Her life had taught her to read subtle cues, both human and environmental, to anticipate moments of danger and opportunity. The day began with the hum of the city outside. Merchants shouted over the rhythmic clatter of carts on uneven stone, children ran barefoot along narrow streets, and the distant bleating of goats echoed from nearby yards. Timoclea moved through her home, attending to the usual chores, grinding grain, tending small fires, and preparing food. Each action was deliberate, measured, and mindful. The familiarity of routine provided both comfort and a framework for survival. It was in this environment, where observation and careful timing were necessary for daily life, that her instincts for clever maneuvering were sharpened. Her adversary, a soldier accustomed to imposing dominance, arrived without warning. The ordinary rhythm of her household was disrupted instantly by the weight of his presence. He carried the confidence of authority, armed and unaware that ordinary caution could serve as a shield. Timoclea, drawing upon years of observing human behavior, noticed the telltale signs: a slight arrogance in his posture, the predictable way he assessed his surroundings, and his tendency to underestimate those he deemed weaker. Each of these observations became a critical piece in the mental map she formed within seconds. As he approached, Timoclea maintained a composed demeanor. She did not flee, nor did she challenge him outright. Instead, she allowed the flow of his assumptions to shape the encounter. The soldier expected compliance, predictability, and ease of control. She offered them, but only superficially. Every word, gesture, and movement was carefully calculated to maintain the illusion of vulnerability, while secretly preparing the conditions for his undoing. She moved with a rhythm that seemed ordinary, yet each step, each placement of a jar or chest, was strategic. The setting itself became a tool. The layout of her home, the placement of furniture, the narrow corridors, the height of steps, provided advantages that only someone intimately familiar with the space could exploit. She positioned herself so that the soldier's forward momentum, guided by expectation rather than awareness, would work against him. A slightly ajar chest, a carefully balanced jar, and the direction of the floor's slope became instruments of calculation, subtly influencing the course of the encounter without requiring brute force. Her understanding of human psychology was equally critical. The soldier's sense of entitlement, combined with a belief in his own physical dominance, made him predictable. Timoclea exploited this by allowing him to act first, to commit to movements that he assumed would be under his control. She observed micro-signals: the shift of weight, the tilt of the head, the tightening of fingers, that indicated his intent. Each small cue allowed her to anticipate his actions and prepare responses that appeared spontaneous but were in fact premeditated. The pivotal moment arrived when the soldier, confident in his dominance, miscalculated. Timoclea's careful orchestration of space, timing, and distraction created an opening. She acted not with violence but with precise timing, turning his aggression into vulnerability. The jars and furniture she had arranged so deliberately became conduits of control, allowing her to redirect the soldier's energy and create the conditions for his incapacitation. Every element of the home, previously mundane, became integral to the execution of her plan. The psychological dimension of her strategy cannot be overstated. She maintained composure throughout, projecting calm and compliance while mentally coordinating a sequence of actions. Her understanding of timing, the moment to step, the instant to shift a jar, the subtle misalignment that would trip or destabilize, was grounded in observation, practice, and instinct. In essence, she used the soldier's own assumptions and overconfidence as tools, a technique as much intellectual as it was practical. Even after the immediate threat was neutralized, the environment remained charged with consequences. Timoclea's actions required rapid recalibration, ensuring that the encounter left her household intact, that no further attention would be drawn, and that the broader social dynamics of the neighborhood remained undisturbed. She moved with quiet efficiency, restoring order while remaining alert to residual risk. The ordinary tasks of her home, the sweeping of floors, the placement of jars, the arrangement of bedding, now carried additional layers of significance, functioning as both precaution and camouflage. This interplay of ordinary life and strategic action illustrates the subtle genius of her survival. Timoclea's experience underscores a profound lesson: knowledge of environment, human behavior, and timing can confer power as effectively as physical strength. In the quiet precision of her movements, she demonstrated that intelligence, observation, and patience could shape outcomes far beyond what might be expected from an individual in a subordinate position. Her ability to anticipate and manipulate events within her home also reflects broader social dynamics. Ancient Greek society often left women with limited formal power, yet the constraints of gender and status could be navigated with ingenuity. Timoclea's cleverness highlights the ways ordinary citizens, particularly women, leveraged perception, routine, and intimate knowledge of surroundings to achieve outcomes otherwise thought impossible. Her survival, therefore, is both a personal triumph and a reflection of the understated strategies embedded in daily life. And yet, even in this apparent triumph, the story leaves questions unanswered. What longer-term repercussions did her actions have on the perceptions of her household, neighbors, or the city at large? How did she integrate this extraordinary experience into the ordinary routines that structured her life? The historical record offers only fragments, but these fragments hint at the quiet strength, intelligence, and adaptability required to navigate such perilous encounters. The aftermath of the encounter left Timoclea with both a sense of relief and a sharp awareness of the lingering dangers in Thebes. The streets, though returning to their usual rhythm, seemed imbued with a subtle tension. Every passerby, every merchant, every neighbor became part of a network of observation where small actions and deviations could carry amplified consequences. Timoclea understood this better than most. Survival in her world depended not just on singular acts of cleverness, but on integrating those acts into the ongoing flow of ordinary life, without attracting suspicion or retaliation. Her first task was to restore equilibrium within her household. The jars, chests, and simple furnishings she had used to her advantage during the encounter were carefully reset to their habitual positions. Nothing in the home should suggest disruption, for curiosity or gossip could attract attention from neighbors or authorities. The small fires were stoked, the hearth tended, and food preparation resumed with its steady rhythm, a quiet declaration that life continued undisturbed. In Thebes, appearances were often as critical as actions. Maintaining a facade of normalcy protected both personal safety and social credibility. Observing the city itself became a critical component of Timoclea's continued vigilance. Market days returned to their customary cadence, filled with the calls of vendors, the shuffle of coins, and the scent of baking bread mingled with river smells. She watched the interactions of merchants and customers, noting patterns of trust, negotiation, and rivalry. Each person, each behavior, was a data point. In observing these ordinary exchanges, she reinforced her understanding of human motivations, habits, and the subtle cues that indicated deception or opportunity. These insights would inform not only daily life, but her future interactions with those who underestimated her. Water management remained a central concern, particularly after a sudden summer heat wave left wells lower than expected. Timoclea monitored water levels, carefully rationed supplies, and planned for contingencies. Clay jars were rotated and inspected, ensuring no cracks or leaks could compromise stored water. She coordinated these tasks with her family, subtly instructing younger members in practices they would need to internalize. This blend of ordinary labor and strategic foresight reflects the underlying principle of her approach. Survival was rarely a matter of a single heroic act, but a continuous process of observation, adaptation, and preparation. Her social interactions also demanded caution and nuance. Neighbors who might have been unaware of the previous confrontation now required careful navigation. A raised eyebrow, a question about visitors, or an inquisitive glance could prompt gossip that spread through the tightly knit fabric of Theban society. Timoclea learned to respond with measured expressions, deflecting curiosity without drawing suspicion. Each social exchange became a subtle test of patience, composure, and perceptive judgment. The ordinary rules of civility were now instruments of survival, extending the lesson that even routine social behavior could have strategic significance. Meanwhile, her personal reflection deepened. She considered not only what had transpired, but how she had orchestrated it. Her ability to anticipate, manipulate, and act decisively was not innate alone. It was cultivated through years of living attentively, absorbing the cues embedded in everyday life. The patterns of movement, the rhythms of trade, the timing of domestic chores, all had contributed to her capacity to act in the decisive moment. In this light, the encounter with the soldier was less a singular act of bravery and more an emergent outcome of continuous, disciplined observation and learning. Timoclea's attention to detail extended to the broader environment. She observed weather patterns, noting the subtle signs of approaching storms or shifts in temperature. She monitored seasonal changes that could affect the availability of food, the behavior of animals, and the flow of the river. These ordinary, seemingly mundane observations were, in fact, essential to predicting circumstances that could either threaten or support her household. In her careful cataloguing of natural and human patterns, Timoclea built an intricate map of risk and opportunity, allowing her to make decisions with foresight that few could match. Trade and commerce also offered opportunities for subtle control and influence. Timoclea watched the arrival of merchants, noting the timing, inventory, and even minor imperfections in goods. Her household's reputation for honesty and diligence gave her credibility in these exchanges. She leveraged this trust to ensure fair transactions while also cultivating insights into the habits of individuals who might later pose threats. Understanding how ordinary interactions of commerce could be observed, interpreted, and subtly manipulated became an extension of her strategic toolkit. The interplay of domestic responsibility and observational skill continued into education and mentoring within her household. Younger family members, though engaged in routine chores, absorbed lessons in careful attention, patience, and the anticipatory skills necessary for survival. Timoclea provided guidance through subtle instruction, allowing observation, repetition, and practice to instill knowledge that could not be learned from books or formal lessons. In doing so, she perpetuated the same survival skills that had allowed her to navigate extraordinary circumstances. Even the rhythms of leisure were integrated into this ongoing strategy. Storytelling and song, while relaxing, also served as tools for understanding human behavior, timing, and narrative logic. Children and adults alike learned from these experiences to recognize patterns, anticipate consequences, and discern intentions. The ordinary pleasure of entertainment thus doubled as a form of cognitive training, reinforcing the capacity to act deliberately in both everyday life and moments of crisis. Religious and ritual practice remained a subtle anchor throughout this period. Household offerings, prayers, and public festivals reinforced both internal discipline and social cohesion. These routines were structured, predictable, and deeply integrated into the social and cognitive fabric of the city. Participation in rituals strengthened community bonds and provided additional opportunities for observation, monitoring how others behaved, what they prioritized, and how they interpreted omens or signs. This extended Timoclea's understanding of human behavior, social norms, and potential avenues for influence. Evenings were now a time for reflection and planning. Timoclea considered potential threats, both immediate and long-term, while ensuring the ordinary functions of the household remained uninterrupted. Food, water, and domestic routines were maintained with meticulous care. She anticipated potential disruptions, thieves, minor disputes, or unexpected visitors, and devised strategies that relied on her knowledge of environment, timing, and human behavior. The ordinary diligence of these preparations underscored a broader principle: survival and influence were cultivated quietly, in repetition, patience, and attention to detail, rather than in overt displays of strength or confrontation. And yet, even as she restored order, the broader dynamics of Thebes continued to pose challenges. The city's walls could not prevent internal threats, nor could routine labor fully protect against the unpredictability of human ambition, desire, or error. Timoclea's ability to navigate these challenges depended on her continuous observation and reflection, the integration of experience with strategy, and the subtle manipulation of ordinary routines to achieve extraordinary outcomes. The story prompts a lingering question: how much of her later ingenuity, her ability to act decisively, strategically, and successfully, was cultivated through years of routine observation and careful attention to ordinary life? Could anyone, living with such ordinary structures and constraints, develop the acute awareness and deliberate skill necessary to turn an imminent threat into an opportunity for survival? The critical moment came quietly, almost imperceptibly, in the muted light of a late afternoon. Timoclea had spent the hours before preparing her home, observing her would-be captor, and calculating the precise sequence of movements that would determine her fate. The soldier, confident in his dominance, did not recognize the environment as a trap laid by observation, patience, and foresight. He assumed control, relying on his strength and expectations of compliance. It was this combination of overconfidence and predictability that Timoclea intended to exploit. She moved as though unaware of the danger, her gestures subtle and measured. A casual step here, a barely noticeable shift of a jar there, each action seemed ordinary, but served a precise purpose. The narrow corridor she had led him into amplified the advantage of her intimate knowledge of space. The uneven floor, slightly sloped and dotted with small obstacles, was now a tool in her hands. Every micro-adjustment of weight, every calculated distraction, nudged him closer to vulnerability. The soldier's own momentum, reinforced by his expectations, became a lever she could manipulate. At the precise moment, she acted decisively. Using the placement of a heavy chest and the slight misalignment of a floor tile, she redirected his balance. The soldier, unprepared and guided by assumptions rather than awareness, stumbled. The jars and pots, carefully arranged to maximize this effect, shifted under his weight, creating both physical and psychological surprise. Timoclea's small, deliberate actions had turned the ordinary environment of her home into a tool of strategic advantage. The encounter was brief but intense. She moved with a clarity born from years of observation and repetition. Every instinct had been honed by routine chores, careful attention to detail, and understanding human behavior. Her ability to act decisively, to transform her intimate knowledge of ordinary life into a survival mechanism, exemplified the subtle power that could exist in circumstances often overlooked by history. The soldier's underestimation of her, a product of social expectations and assumptions about physical dominance, became his undoing. Even as the immediate danger was neutralized, the aftermath demanded careful management. Timoclea's attention shifted to restoring normalcy. Broken jars were reset, displaced furniture returned to its customary positions, and food preparation continued as if nothing had occurred. Maintaining appearances was as important as executing the escape itself. Drawing attention would risk reprisal or gossip. In Thebes, survival required not only clever action, but also careful reintegration into social norms. Ordinary routines served both as camouflage and as instruments for sustaining control over perception. Beyond the physical manipulation of her environment, Timoclea's intellectual strategy was equally critical. She anticipated not only immediate threats, but also potential follow-up actions by the soldier or other observers. Understanding human motivation, fear, anger, overconfidence, allowed her to act preemptively, shaping outcomes in her favor without confrontation. This form of strategy, embedded in everyday life through observation and anticipation, demonstrates how ordinary skills can scale to extraordinary results when combined with acute awareness. Her escape also underscores the understated role of gender and social expectation in ancient Greek society. Women were often assumed to be passive and compliant, their agency limited to domestic tasks and household management. Timoclea's actions subverted these assumptions. She transformed the limitations imposed upon her into instruments of survival, leveraging intimate knowledge of domestic space, acute observation, and strategic thinking to navigate life-threatening circumstances. Her story illustrates how intelligence and adaptability can overturn power structures without overt rebellion or force. The psychological aftermath for Timoclea was equally significant. Beyond the immediate relief of survival, she experienced a reinforced sense of self-efficacy, an awareness of her ability to influence outcomes in a world that often presumed her powerlessness. This quiet triumph was cultivated not in moments of drama, but through years of routine observation, careful management of domestic responsibilities, and subtle understanding of human behavior. The ordinary routines of daily life had prepared her to act decisively in extraordinary circumstances. In the days that followed, Timoclea's household returned to its usual rhythm. Food was prepared, water stored, and trade interactions continued with careful attention. Every small task, cleaning, maintenance, ritual offering, was carried out with a heightened awareness, a reflection of lessons learned from the encounter. Her careful observation of others, already finely tuned, became even sharper. The ordinary had become the foundation for extraordinary resilience, demonstrating the latent power of attentiveness, patience, and subtle strategy. Timoclea's story also illuminates broader principles applicable to her community. Ordinary citizens, particularly women, relied on a combination of perception, routine, and adaptability to navigate the complexities of daily life. The seemingly mundane activities of cleaning, cooking, observing, and managing household resources were not trivial. They were exercises in preparation, teaching skills that could be applied in moments of crisis. Her actions exemplify how ordinary intelligence, applied consistently, can shape outcomes in ways often unrecognized by traditional historical narratives. Even as the city of Thebes continued its everyday rhythm, the implications of Timoclea's actions lingered. Her ability to survive, to manipulate her environment, and the assumptions of others demonstrates how the ordinary and the extraordinary are intertwined. The city's stability, the daily routines of its residents, and the subtle attentiveness required to maintain them were all part of a larger matrix in which moments of decisive action could emerge. In essence, her cleverness was a product not only of individual ingenuity, but also of the structured, disciplined ordinary life that had prepared her for it. And yet, Even with her immediate survival secured, questions remain unresolved. How did her actions influence future interactions within her neighborhood? Did others learn from her example, adopting subtle strategies of observation and preparedness in their own lives? How did such individual acts, grounded in ordinary life, ripple outward to shape collective memory and social behavior? These questions linger in the shadows of history, suggesting that extraordinary outcomes are often the culmination of long periods of preparation, observation, and quiet intelligence embedded in the routines of daily existence. Timoclea's story ultimately reflects the power of ordinary life as a training ground for extraordinary resilience. Each chore, each observation, each routine interaction had contributed to her capacity to survive a moment that could have ended her life. In this, her tale becomes more than a single historical anecdote. It is a meditation on the subtle intelligence cultivated through careful attention, patience, and the quiet mastery of ordinary circumstances. Her ingenuity demonstrates that survival often hinges less on brute strength or chance, and more on the disciplined, thoughtful engagement with the world that begins long before any crisis arises. Timoclea returned to her household after the encounter with the soldier with a heightened awareness of every detail in her environment. The sun was lower in the sky, casting long shadows across Thebes' narrow streets. The city, seemingly ordinary and unremarkable to an outsider, was alive with subtle movements and signals. Merchants rearranged their stalls, children ran errands, and the clatter of cart wheels over uneven stone echoed faintly. Timoclea's eyes, trained by years of observation, noted every shift in posture, glance, and timing. In this city, survival was a matter of noticing the unnoticed. Her immediate focus remained on maintaining appearances within her home. Pots and jars were placed back in their familiar positions, the hearth tended, and the floors swept with practiced efficiency. Every detail mattered. A slightly displaced jar or an unwashed plate could spark curiosity or draw attention. The ordinary act of cleaning became strategic, a subtle reinforcement of normalcy. Timoclea understood that the soldier's defeat was only the beginning. Preventing rumor, suspicion, or further intrusion required the same attention to detail that had saved her life. As evening approached, she reflected on the subtle mechanisms that had led to her survival. Her strategy had relied not on confrontation or physical strength, but on precise manipulation of the environment and careful anticipation of human behavior. The alignment of jars, the slope of the floor, the arrangement of furniture, all ordinary elements, became instruments of control. These elements, so mundane in daily life, had been transformed into tools of ingenuity. She realized that her ability to act decisively in that moment was inseparable from the ordinary attentiveness cultivated over years. Timoclea's household continued its evening routines. Water jars were inspected and refilled, food stores were checked and organized, children were guided through simple tasks that reinforced observation and patience. Each act, no matter how minor, served both immediate practical needs and long-term preparation. In this way, ordinary life was inseparable from extraordinary readiness. Survival was not a single act of brilliance, but a continuous integration of observation, planning, and disciplined action. The city beyond her home remained a web of subtle cues and potential threats. Citizens moved in predictable patterns, yet the unpredictability of human behavior always introduced risk. Timoclea had learned to interpret micro-signals: a sudden glance, a shift in tone, or an unexpected path through the streets could all indicate danger or opportunity. Her ability to notice, anticipate, and respond to these small signs was central to her quiet triumph. Every step in Thebes required a combination of attentiveness and patience, a skill she had honed through daily life long before it was ever tested by immediate danger. Trade and resource management continued to shape the rhythms of the city. Merchants delivered grain, olive oil, and other essentials while negotiating the delicate balance between trust and vigilance. Timoclea observed these exchanges closely, understanding how timing, quantity, and social behavior could influence outcomes. Knowledge of patterns and habits allowed her to anticipate shortages, leverage trust, and avoid disputes. Ordinary observation of commerce was now inseparable from strategic awareness, demonstrating the subtle ways in which mundane knowledge could be transformed into survival advantage. Social interactions, too, were layered with significance. Neighbors, while friendly on the surface, were constantly evaluating each other for reliability, trustworthiness, and alignment with social norms. Timoclea navigated these dynamics with care, projecting calm and composure while remaining acutely aware of signals that could indicate curiosity or threat. Her ordinary attentiveness became a shield, allowing her to operate under the radar, while subtly shaping perceptions of competence and composure. Even the rhythms of leisure and storytelling contributed to her skills. Songs, tales, and games within her household reinforced observation, timing, and subtle prediction. Children learned to watch and anticipate patterns in both behavior and story, while adults exercised patience and interpretation. Timoclea recognized that such ordinary activities, though seemingly trivial, were fertile training grounds for cognitive skills essential to navigating unpredictable or dangerous situations. Religious rituals and daily offerings remained integral. Small acts of devotion, whether placing incense on a household altar or participating in communal festivals, provided both spiritual grounding and social continuity. Observation of these rituals offered insights into neighbors' priorities, behaviors, and status. The ordinary practice of religious life became a form of intelligence gathering, helping Timoclea anticipate social dynamics and align her own actions with broader patterns of expectation and authority. Her continued attentiveness extended to environmental observation. The changing patterns of weather, river flow, and animal activity provided critical information about potential risks or opportunities. Every detail, slight changes in temperature, unusual movements of birds or livestock, or subtle shifts in air currents, was catalogued mentally, forming a living map of the city and its surroundings. This constant observation turned ordinary life into a continuous exercise in preparedness, sharpening skills that could be deployed in moments of crisis. Timoclea's reflection on the day's events highlighted a fundamental principle. Extraordinary outcomes often emerge from ordinary attentiveness, disciplined routine, and careful observation. Her triumph was not a sudden stroke of luck, but the result of years of engagement with the subtleties of human behavior, domestic management, and environmental awareness. Each chore, each observation, and each routine action had built a foundation for resilience, patience, and ingenuity. And yet, even with her immediate environment stabilized, questions lingered. How would Timoclea's household integrate this experience into future routines? How would neighbors, merchants, and local authorities perceive her subtle control over events? And perhaps most importantly, what lessons about observation, preparation, and the quiet mastery of ordinary life could she carry forward into challenges yet unforeseen? The following days in Timoclea's household unfolded with the familiar rhythm of domestic life, yet each movement and decision carried a heightened sense of purpose. She approached every task with quiet deliberation, aware that her environment, though seemingly ordinary, could both conceal and reveal danger. The routine chores, sweeping, preparing food, inspecting jars of grain, were now exercises in vigilance, observation, and the subtle manipulation of surroundings. Even the simplest acts were infused with intention. Her family's cooperation became essential. Children and servants followed her instructions with precision, learning to anticipate needs, notice small changes, and act without drawing undue attention. Tasks such as refilling water jars, balancing pots on shelves, or arranging tools in predictable patterns were repeated with consistency, reinforcing both discipline and awareness. Timoclea understood that these ordinary lessons were foundational. They trained the household in foresight, adaptability, and the quiet readiness required to navigate unexpected events. Observation of neighbors and passers-by remained an ongoing practice. Timoclea noted subtle shifts in posture, timing, and gaze. The patterns of merchants delivering goods, the routes children took to schools and fountains, and the interactions between women at household altars were catalogued carefully in her mind. These insights allowed her to anticipate potential threats, identify allies, and understand the subtle ebb and flow of influence within the community. In essence, her perception of ordinary life became a strategic tool. The soldier's intrusion, though now behind her, had left an enduring lesson. Ordinary assumptions about vulnerability could be exploited, and human behavior could be anticipated with careful attention. Timoclea applied this understanding to the social fabric of Thebes. She observed who was trusted, who was overlooked, and who might act unpredictably. Each interaction, whether at the market, in the street, or during communal festivals, was an opportunity to refine her understanding of human nature and practice subtle influence. Domestic and commercial routines continued to intersect. Merchants delivered staples such as olive oil, wine, and grains, while neighbors coordinated shared resources like firewood or water. Timoclea paid attention to the timing, order, and social nuances of these exchanges. Each transaction offered insights into priorities, reliability, and potential risks. By integrating observation into ordinary life, she reinforced both the household's resilience and her own strategic awareness. Even leisure activities held practical value. Music, storytelling, and games provided opportunities for learning and observation. Timoclea noticed the subtle cues of timing, rhythm, and reaction among children and adults alike. These activities trained the mind to recognize patterns, anticipate responses, and interpret behavior, skills that could be applied in high-stakes situations. In her household, even play was a form of preparation, quietly sharpening skills essential for survival and influence. Religious observances provided structure and insight. Household offerings, prayers, and communal rituals followed established routines. But Timoclea observed the variations in timing, intensity, and attention among neighbors. These deviations conveyed information about priorities, intentions, and potential vulnerabilities. Ordinary acts of devotion, repeated and observed carefully, became a source of social intelligence. In this way, her household maintained spiritual alignment while subtly monitoring the surrounding environment. Environmental awareness remained a constant concern. Shifts in temperature, the flow of the river, animal behavior, and wind patterns provided cues about both immediate and long-term conditions. Timoclea used these signals to adjust water storage, firewood allocation, and household routines. By integrating natural observation into daily life, she strengthened her capacity to respond to both predictable and unforeseen challenges. Every small adjustment reflected a careful balance between ordinary labor and strategic foresight. As the days turned into weeks, Timoclea's household settled into a rhythm of quiet resilience. Each member, trained in observation, patience, and attention to detail, contributed to the collective security and stability. The ordinary routines, preparing meals, tending fires, maintaining tools and storage, were imbued with an undercurrent of subtle strategic practice. In this environment, preparedness was continuous, and every action reinforced a broader framework of resilience. Even public interactions were infused with strategy. Timoclea attended the market and festivals with an eye for detail, noting who approached whom, how merchants arranged their goods, and how patterns of behavior indicated alliances or rivalries. The city itself became a living classroom, offering continuous lessons in timing, influence, and anticipation. Her understanding of ordinary life, honed over years, provided her with a quiet mastery of her environment, allowing her to navigate both social and practical challenges with confidence. Through these practices, the household not only survived, but thrived. The combination of domestic diligence, environmental observation, social awareness, and subtle strategic intervention created a robust framework for resilience. Each ordinary task carried additional significance, teaching lessons that extended beyond immediate needs. In this way, Timoclea's quiet triumph was not a singular moment, but a continuous process, cultivated through ordinary attentiveness and disciplined practice. The story raises an enduring question: how much of human ingenuity and resilience depends not on dramatic actions, but on the careful cultivation of ordinary skills, routines, and observations over time? Timoclea's capacity to turn everyday knowledge into decisive action exemplifies the hidden power embedded in the mundane. It reminds us that extraordinary outcomes are often rooted in the slow accumulation of ordinary practice and careful attention to detail. The decisive culmination of Timoclea's careful planning unfolded with the precision of a life honed through years of attentiveness. The soldier, once an imposing presence in her home, had underestimated not only her resolve, but also her intimate knowledge of her surroundings. The ordinary elements of her household, the jars, chests, and narrow corridors, had been transformed into instruments of subtle control, enabling her to manipulate the encounter with minimal force and maximum effectiveness. As the confrontation began, she moved deliberately, presenting the appearance of compliance while orchestrating the precise sequence of events that would turn his confidence into vulnerability. Each gesture, step, and shift in posture was carefully considered, aligning with the principles she had cultivated through routine domestic labor and observation. The arrangement of furniture, the slight incline of the floor, and the positioning of everyday objects became extensions of her strategy, converting ordinary surroundings into tools of survival. The soldier's forward momentum, guided by overconfidence, played into her hands. A misplaced step here, a subtle adjustment there, and he was destabilized by the very environment he presumed to control. Timoclea's quiet ingenuity allowed her to redirect his actions without resorting to overt violence. The ordinary rhythms of her home, previously unnoticed, had become a calculated maze, turning his assumptions against him and ensuring her escape from immediate danger. Once the immediate threat was neutralized, Timoclea shifted her focus to restoration. Every detail of her household was returned to normalcy. Jars were replaced, floors swept, fires tended. Maintaining the appearance of ordinary life was essential to prevent gossip or retaliation. She understood that survival was not merely about a single moment of cleverness, but about reintegrating that moment into the continuum of daily routines without disruption. In Thebes, the illusion of calm and routine was as protective as any physical barrier. Her strategy extended beyond the physical to encompass the social landscape. Timoclea carefully monitored her neighbors, subtly interpreting expressions, questions, and routines to gauge awareness and potential risk. Her understanding of human behavior allowed her to maintain both discretion and influence, ensuring that the encounter remained private while reinforcing her household's resilience. Ordinary social interactions became instruments of strategy, each glance or word offering insight into intentions and character. Environmental observation continued to guide her actions. Subtle cues from the river, the wind, and the patterns of animal movement informed daily routines. Adjustments in water management, firewood allocation, and storage practices reflected her ability to integrate natural observation with domestic management. Ordinary attention to these details became a form of anticipatory strategy, enabling her to prepare for challenges that others might overlook. Trade, commerce, and resource management provided further arenas for subtle influence. Timoclea observed merchants' behaviors, the timing of deliveries, and patterns of exchange. These ordinary practices offered insight into trust, reliability, and social networks, allowing her to anticipate potential threats or opportunities. Her careful attention transformed routine commerce into an ongoing exercise in observation and strategic adaptation. Even leisure and education were woven into her framework of resilience. Storytelling, games, and household routines trained observation, patience, and predictive skill. Children absorbed lessons in anticipation and pattern recognition, while adults refined their understanding of timing, behavior, and social dynamics. Ordinary acts of play and learning were thus embedded with the skills necessary to navigate complex and sometimes dangerous circumstances. Religious rituals and public ceremonies served both as spiritual grounding and sources of social intelligence. Timoclea noted the variations in others' participation, interpreting deviations in timing, intensity, and focus as subtle indicators of priorities or potential alliances. The ordinary practice of devotion provided insights into human behavior, allowing her to navigate communal life with discretion and awareness. Through these layers of observation, preparation, and strategic action, Timoclea's household became a model of quiet resilience. Ordinary routines, cooking, cleaning, tending fires, managing water, were elevated to instruments of survival and influence. Her story demonstrates that intelligence and resourcefulness are often cultivated not in dramatic gestures, but through careful attention to the mundane, disciplined observation, and the integration of ordinary knowledge into strategic action. Ultimately, Timoclea's triumph lies in her ability to harness the ordinary to achieve the extraordinary. The soldier's defeat, though significant, is only one aspect of her broader mastery, a mastery developed through years of attentive living, observation of human behavior, environmental awareness, and disciplined management of domestic and social life. Her ingenuity illustrates the often overlooked power inherent in the routine, the habitual, and the seemingly mundane. Yet, even with the immediate danger behind her, questions persist. How did this experience shape her future decisions, relationships, and strategies? Did the neighbors, merchants, or local authorities ever discern the subtle intelligence that had guided her actions? And how might these lessons in observation, patience, and strategic use of ordinary life continue to ripple outward, influencing others or shaping events in ways history has only partially recorded? Timoclea's story is a testament to the quiet power of attentiveness, patience, and the careful orchestration of everyday life. Survival, influence, and ingenuity are often less about dramatic heroics and more about the sustained, deliberate engagement with ordinary circumstances. Her life reminds us that extraordinary outcomes are frequently the culmination of careful preparation, subtle understanding, and disciplined observation cultivated over time, hidden within the routines of daily existence. Timoclea had survived the immediate threat, yet the memory of the soldier's intrusion lingered in the corners of her mind. Not in anger, but in deliberate calculation. The city of Thebes moved on with its ordinary rhythms, market calls, the clatter of carts over stone streets, and the faint murmur of domestic chores. But for Timoclea, every movement, every glance, every minor interaction became part of a long, measured plan. Survival had taught her patience, observation, and strategy. Now, these same tools were to be applied toward ensuring justice, not through brute force, but through cunning. Her first step was gathering information. She watched the soldiers as they moved through the streets, noting their patterns, habits, and routines. She observed which taverns they frequented, the timing of their patrols, and the informal hierarchies among them. Each detail, no matter how mundane, became a potential lever she could manipulate. She understood that knowledge was as potent a weapon as any spear or blade. The soldier had relied on his physical strength and assumptions of compliance. She would rely on careful observation and anticipation. Within her household, she maintained an outward appearance of calm. Meals were prepared at the usual hours, floors swept, and water jars inspected and rotated. Children carried out routine tasks under her subtle guidance, learning patience and attentiveness without fully realizing the strategic dimension behind the instruction. Timoclea understood that even ordinary domestic routines could cultivate the skills required for survival and subtle manipulation. The mundane, repeated with deliberate purpose, became a form of preparation. She also considered social alliances. While her immediate household provided her sanctuary, the broader network of neighbors and merchants offered information, influence, and potential leverage. Casual interactions, exchanging a smile, listening to gossip, noting minor adjustments in tone, provided insights into who could be trusted, who was unreliable, and who might act as a silent observer. These interactions, though ordinary in appearance, were carefully processed and catalogued. Timoclea was weaving a subtle web of awareness, each thread contributing to her ultimate plan. The soldier, unaware of the growing attention, continued his daily routines. His confidence, born of previous assumptions about women's passivity, rendered him predictable. He moved through the city in patterns Timoclea had begun to map mentally. Market stops, conversations with comrades, rest periods, all revealed minute but actionable information. She noted not only what he did, but also how others responded to him. Small shifts in posture, fleeting expressions, and whispered exchanges told stories he could not control. By cataloging these details, Timoclea was preparing the architecture of a trap that relied not on confrontation, but on timing, misdirection, and his own assumptions. Environmental observation was equally critical. She noted the city's layout, the narrow alleys, and the familiar inclines and courtyards. Each location had advantages and vulnerabilities, from discreet hiding places to strategic vantage points. The city itself became an instrument. Ordinary structures, streets, and domestic spaces could be used to orchestrate events. Timoclea's intimate knowledge of Thebes' ordinary geography gave her leverage that the soldier, relying solely on strength, could not anticipate. Her plan unfolded in stages. She knew that patience was essential. Any hasty attempt at vengeance could alert the soldier or others to her intentions, potentially placing her household at risk. Instead, she observed, waited, and prepared. She used ordinary daily routines as cover, making subtle adjustments to her household and movements that, while appearing mundane, served multiple functions, reinforcing security, cultivating attentiveness, and testing the reactions of those around her. The ordinary rhythms of life became a scaffold upon which extraordinary strategy was constructed. Timoclea also considered psychological strategy. The soldier's overconfidence, reliance on assumptions, and social position could all be exploited. She reflected on the principles that guided her previous actions: patience, manipulation of ordinary surroundings, and subtle misdirection. These principles could be expanded into a more complex plan. By anticipating his expectations, she could orchestrate outcomes that seemed accidental, yet were entirely intentional. The combination of spatial knowledge, human observation, and psychological insight became the foundation for a measured act of retribution. In parallel, she continued her domestic responsibilities. Meals were prepared with the same care, water stores monitored, and household rituals maintained. Ordinary actions, cleaning, tending fires, arranging tools, were deliberately integrated into her strategic awareness. Nothing in her home could hint at the unfolding plan. The appearance of calm and continuity served as both cover and a reinforcement of her subtle control over events. The mundane became inseparable from strategy. As the days passed, Timoclea's awareness expanded beyond her household. She mapped the soldier's likely routes, noting intersections, potential observers, and the ordinary cues he relied upon to navigate the city. Even small changes, such as the position of a cart, the timing of a merchant's deliveries, or the behavior of neighbors, were catalogued and factored into her plan. In this meticulous preparation, ordinary observation merged with extraordinary foresight. Yet even as she prepared, questions lingered. How far could one rely on ordinary environments and human patterns to exact revenge? Could subtlety and patience achieve outcomes that brute force could not? And how might her actions ripple beyond a single encounter, influencing the behavior and perception of others in ways that history might overlook? The moment to put her plan into motion arrived subtly, almost imperceptibly, as if the city itself conspired to provide the perfect opportunity. Timoclea had spent days observing the soldier's routines, mapping the rhythms of his movements and noting small but consistent patterns. Now, she would exploit these habitual behaviors without drawing attention to herself. Her approach was not one of confrontation, but of patience, precision, and quiet orchestration. The streets of Thebes were alive with the ordinary sounds of life: merchants calling prices, carts rolling over uneven stones, children laughing and running errands. Timoclea used these sounds as cover, moving deliberately and blending into the routine of the city. Every glance, every step was calculated. She anticipated the soldier's timing, knowing when he would pass certain intersections, when he would pause at a market stall, and when he would remain momentarily distracted by familiar faces. The ordinary details of daily life became the scaffolding for her strategic maneuver. In the marketplace, she set the first subtle stage for her plan. Barrels were shifted slightly, crates stacked in predictable patterns, and pathways narrowed in such a way that someone unfamiliar with the space would be guided along a particular route. These adjustments were small and natural enough to appear as everyday organization, yet each acted as a nudge in the trajectory she wanted to enforce. Timoclea understood that effective strategy often relied on invisible manipulation, actions so ordinary that they would not be noticed until it was too late. She monitored the soldier from a distance, noting his interactions with other citizens. His confidence, a product of previous assumptions about women and the domestic sphere, remained unshaken. Timoclea observed the subtle signs of his anticipation, overconfidence, and predictability, habits that would become crucial to her orchestration. She knew that when his attention was divided, he became vulnerable. Every pause, every gesture, every casual glance was data she catalogued for the decisive moment. Timing was everything. She coordinated her movements with the city's natural rhythms, the midday lull when merchants rested, the slight shift in pedestrian flow as children returned from errands, and the pause in soldiers' patrols during meal breaks. These ordinary cycles became a framework upon which she could act decisively. She relied not on brute strength, but on the predictable structures of daily life, turning familiarity and habit into instruments of strategy. As the soldier moved along his predictable route, Timoclea guided him subtly without his awareness. She positioned herself and objects in ways that funneled his path precisely toward the spot she had prepared. The interplay of spatial knowledge, psychological insight, and anticipation created a scenario in which his assumptions, his confidence in dominance and control, would be used against him. Ordinary items such as barrels, benches, and narrow alleyways became tools in her orchestration, transforming the mundane environment into a stage for precise action. She also anticipated the soldier's social instincts. His awareness of peers, concern for appearances, and habitual interactions made him predictable. Timoclea had observed how he reacted to others, noting moments of hesitation, distraction, and pride. These behavioral patterns, mundane in isolation, coalesced into a framework for manipulation. By subtly influencing his perception of the environment and the actions of others, she could guide him toward outcomes that appeared accidental but were entirely intentional. The household, too, played a role. Children were instructed in seemingly ordinary tasks, moving small containers, adjusting items in the market under the guise of errands, and observing without drawing attention. Each minor action contributed to the larger design, reinforcing the illusion of everyday life while supporting the strategic manipulation of events. Timoclea had transformed ordinary routines into instruments of orchestration, integrating observation, timing, and subtle intervention into a seamless plan. As the decisive moment approached, the environment itself became an ally. The positioning of crates and barrels, the narrow twists of alleyways, and the natural inclines of streets were all factored into her design. The soldier, relying on his habitual patterns and assumptions of dominance, would move exactly as she anticipated. Ordinary geography, when combined with human predictability, became a force multiplier, enabling her to act indirectly and with minimal risk while ensuring maximum effect. The moment of execution was swift, quiet, and precise. The soldier's overconfidence, guided by assumptions and habitual behavior, led him exactly where Timoclea had predicted. He faltered in the subtle trap she had prepared, destabilized not by overt confrontation, but by the careful orchestration of familiar surroundings. Objects shifted, balance was lost, and the momentum he relied upon worked against him. Her strategy, grounded in ordinary observation and patient calculation, reached its culmination. Yet even as the act of retribution succeeded, Timoclea's focus shifted immediately to the aftermath. She understood the importance of returning the city, the household, and herself to a state of normalcy. Every object, every path, and every social interaction required careful management to prevent suspicion or retaliation. The appearance of calm, continuity, and ordinariness became as essential as the act itself. In her hands, everyday life was simultaneously a shield, a weapon, and a stage. And still, questions persisted. How would her subtle act of vengeance influence the behavior of others in Thebes? Could her quiet orchestration serve as a lesson in observation, patience, and intelligence for neighbors, household members, or even future generations? And perhaps most intriguingly, how often does history overlook such acts, extraordinary outcomes rooted not in force, but in the careful application of ordinary life and subtle strategy? The final act of Timoclea's revenge unfolded with quiet precision, a culmination of observation, patience, and subtle orchestration honed over days of careful planning. The soldier, confident in his physical dominance and unthinking assumptions about women, moved exactly as she anticipated. Every step, every glance, every habitual pause had been accounted for. The ordinary spaces of Thebes, its alleyways, market stalls, and household courtyards, were transformed into instruments of strategic advantage. As he entered the area Timoclea had prepared, his trajectory guided by familiar habits and the predictable flow of daily life, she remained in the shadows. A slight misalignment of crates, the narrow channeling of his path by seemingly ordinary barrels, and the careful positioning of onlookers created the precise conditions for his stumble. Timoclea's strategy relied entirely on his assumptions and the environment he took for granted. Ordinary objects, mundane yet deliberately arranged, now dictated the outcome of the encounter. When the moment came, the soldier faltered. His balance betrayed him, and in that instant, the culmination of Timoclea's meticulous observation and careful planning took effect. There was no need for overt confrontation. The momentum of his own movements, combined with the environment she had shaped, completed the work. The act was swift, silent, and decisive, leaving him humbled by the unforeseen consequences of ordinary spaces and predictable habits. In that single moment, the ordinary became extraordinary, a testament to her ingenuity and patience. Immediately afterward, Timoclea shifted focus to restoring normalcy. Every barrel, crate, and minor adjustment was returned to its typical arrangement. Children continued their errands, merchants carried out transactions, and passers-by remained unaware of the orchestrated event. The appearance of routine was essential. Any disruption could arouse suspicion or lead to unintended consequences. By blending the extraordinary outcome into the mundane flow of daily life, Timoclea ensured both her safety and the continued quiet mastery of her household environment. Her strategy extended beyond immediate revenge. She observed the reactions of neighbors, noting subtle cues in posture, speech, and expression. These small indicators informed her understanding of social perception and potential risks. The ordinary acts of daily life, market interactions, domestic chores, communal gatherings, provided both cover and intelligence, allowing her to gauge the city's response without revealing her involvement. In Thebes, perception and reputation were intertwined with survival. Timoclea's careful orchestration ensured that her influence remained hidden while her objective was achieved. Environmental awareness continued to play a critical role. She monitored the streets, alleyways, and courtyards, noting the positions of obstacles, vantage points, and escape routes. Every adjustment of her surroundings was deliberate, guided by an understanding of how ordinary spaces could influence outcomes. Her mastery of domestic and urban environments allowed her to turn routine geography into a force multiplier, demonstrating the hidden power of careful observation and subtle manipulation. Trade and commerce offered additional lessons. Merchants, unaware of her orchestration, moved goods and people in predictable patterns, reinforcing the reliability of her environmental planning. timing, spacing, and habitual behavior converged to amplify the effectiveness of her strategy. The ordinary routines of commerce became both camouflage and instrument, highlighting how mundane patterns can be leveraged for extraordinary results. Leisure, education, and domestic routine all played supporting roles. Children learned through observation and participation, absorbing lessons in timing, patience, and anticipation. Household tasks were executed with diligence, reinforcing skills of precision and awareness. Even storytelling and games offered subtle instruction in prediction and adaptation. Timoclea had cultivated an environment where ordinary life itself became a training ground for intelligence and resilience. Religious and social rituals provided both grounding and opportunity. Household offerings, prayers, and communal participation allowed Timoclea to observe subtle variations in behavior. Deviations in timing, attention, or engagement revealed insights into priorities, influence, and potential allies. The ordinary practices of devotion were integrated seamlessly with strategic awareness, demonstrating how everyday routines could serve multiple purposes: spiritual, social, and tactical. Ultimately, the consequences of Timoclea's revenge extended beyond the immediate humiliation of the soldier. Her household and community gained subtle lessons in observation, patience, and adaptability. Ordinary tasks, often overlooked or undervalued, were revealed to be tools for survival and influence. Through careful orchestration of daily life, she had demonstrated that extraordinary outcomes are frequently rooted in sustained attention, disciplined practice, and subtle understanding of human behavior and environment. Yet, even after the successful execution of her plan, questions lingered. How would the soldier's perception of authority and women's agency be altered? Would the neighbors internalize lessons about attentiveness, patience, and strategy without recognizing their source? And how does history remember, or overlook, the quiet triumphs of individuals who transform ordinary life into extraordinary mastery? Timoclea's revenge was more than an act of personal justice. It was an affirmation of the latent power within ordinary circumstances. Her story illustrates that survival, influence, and resilience often emerge not from dramatic heroics, but from the disciplined cultivation of ordinary skills, careful observation, and subtle orchestration of daily life. Each chore, glance, and minor adjustment built a foundation for intelligence, strategy, and quiet triumph. Her life stands as a testament to the hidden potency of routine and attentiveness. The mundane, when observed carefully and leveraged thoughtfully, can produce outcomes that shape events, influence behavior, and command respect. Timoclea's story reminds us that the extraordinary often grows from the ordinary, quietly, deliberately, and without fanfare. After the events with the soldier, Timoclea's life returned to a semblance of ordinary rhythm, though the quiet mastery she had cultivated continued to shape her every action. Her household operated with a renewed sense of discipline, precision, and observation. Each routine task, tending the hearth, preparing meals, arranging household items, was carried out with care, blending the ordinary with subtle strategic foresight. These daily practices became both protection and preparation, reinforcing skills that had ensured her survival and delivered justice. Timoclea understood that survival and influence were inseparable from attentiveness. Every visitor, merchant, and neighbor offered information, whether through casual conversation, fleeting gestures, or unnoticed expressions. She catalogued these interactions carefully, noting alliances, tensions, and potential threats. Ordinary social exchanges, when observed closely, revealed patterns that could be leveraged for decision-making, protection, or subtle intervention. Her household, once simply a space of domestic life, became a hub of observation, analysis, and quiet influence. The city of Thebes itself remained a complex web of human behavior, routines, and environments. Streets, markets, and courtyards were rich with signals, the timing of deliveries, the interactions of merchants, the posture of passers-by. Timoclea interpreted these cues with the precision of someone who had learned to see beyond the obvious. Ordinary life was no longer mundane. It was a landscape of intelligence, prediction, and subtle control. Her ability to navigate this landscape allowed her to anticipate events and respond proactively, rather than reactively. Within her household, the next generation learned the importance of observation and strategic thinking. Children were guided to notice subtle patterns in behavior, anticipate outcomes, and act with patience. Lessons were embedded within ordinary activities: fetching water, tending the fire, arranging food stores, turning routine labor into training for resilience. Timoclea's influence extended beyond her immediate survival. She was shaping minds capable of navigating complex social and environmental systems with foresight and discretion. Trade and commerce continued to provide both sustenance and insight. Timoclea observed merchants' routines, patterns of supply, and social connections. She noted how goods were exchanged, which vendors were trusted, and how timing and quantity influenced relationships. By integrating these observations into household routines, she cultivated an understanding of broader social and economic networks. Ordinary transactions became opportunities for intelligence gathering and strategic assessment, reinforcing her ability to act effectively within the city. Religious and communal rituals offered additional layers of influence. Timoclea participated in household offerings, public festivals, and communal prayers, observing the behaviors and priorities of those around her. Variations in participation, timing, or attention provided subtle cues about social alignment, influence, and potential allies. Ordinary religious practice became a tool for understanding the social landscape, enhancing her ability to anticipate events and navigate interpersonal dynamics. Her environmental awareness also deepened. Observing the river's flow, wind patterns, and animal behavior informed her household routines and strategic decisions. Small shifts in these natural rhythms indicated upcoming challenges or opportunities, such as changes in water supply, harvest timing, or community movement. Timoclea's careful attention transformed the ordinary landscape into a source of actionable intelligence, blending domestic life with environmental mastery. Social interactions remained an ongoing exercise in subtle influence. Timoclea's neighbors, unaware of the full extent of her past actions, interacted with her as they would with any other capable household leader. Yet she interpreted their glances, tone, and gestures with precision, using these insights to maintain discretion, reinforce trust, and guide relationships. Ordinary conversation became a channel for understanding intentions and subtly shaping outcomes, further illustrating her mastery of mundane but powerful tools of influence. Even leisure and play contributed to strategic development. Games, stories, and household tasks reinforced observation, timing, and prediction. Children learned to recognize patterns, anticipate consequences, and act with patience, skills that mirrored the principles that had guided Timoclea through moments of danger. Ordinary activities, repeated and observed carefully, became foundational training for resilience, intelligence, and social understanding. Through these practices, Timoclea's later life exemplified the integration of ordinary routines with extraordinary awareness. Her triumphs were rarely visible in dramatic gestures. They manifested through careful observation, disciplined attention, and subtle orchestration of daily life. By transforming mundane tasks into instruments of strategy, she cultivated a household and a personal skill set capable of navigating unpredictability with calm, deliberate action. Yet, questions remained. How would her influence ripple through the community? Would future generations internalize her lessons of observation, patience, and strategic subtlety? And how many of these quiet, calculated successes, achieved without fanfare or recognition? Would history remember, or would they fade into the unrecorded ordinary details of life in Thebes? Timoclea's reach extended gradually beyond the walls of her household. The careful observation, patience, and strategic thinking she had cultivated now allowed her to engage with the wider city in subtle but meaningful ways. She had long learned that influence did not require ostentation. It often emerged from ordinary actions, executed with precision and awareness. Each step through Thebes' streets was both participation and study, a silent negotiation between her presence and the currents of daily life. The marketplace offered rich lessons in social dynamics. Merchants, buyers, and passers-by followed habitual routines, which Timoclea observed and mentally mapped. The placement of stalls, the timing of deliveries, and the selection of goods all conveyed information. She learned who could be relied upon for accurate information, who was prone to exaggeration, and whose interests aligned with hers. By integrating these observations into her decision-making, she subtly shaped transactions and interactions, fostering trust while maintaining discretion. Ordinary commerce, in her hands, became a channel for influence and insight. Neighborhood relationships were equally significant. Timoclea engaged with neighbors through seemingly casual gestures, sharing food, exchanging small favors, or participating in communal work. Each interaction was an opportunity to reinforce alliances, assess character, and identify potential vulnerabilities. By remaining discreet and unobtrusive, she ensured that her influence was recognized not through force, but through reliability, consistency, and social intelligence. Ordinary social practices became a medium for strategic cultivation of trust and understanding. Religious and ceremonial participation remained a cornerstone of her influence. Public rituals, offerings, and festivals offered opportunities to observe patterns of devotion, attention, and social alignment. Timoclea noted who arrived early, who lingered, and who participated half-heartedly. These subtle cues provided insight into priorities, power dynamics, and potential allies. Her own measured participation demonstrated both respect for custom and awareness of social nuance. In this way, ordinary religious practice became a tool for shaping perceptions and navigating complex community networks. Timoclea's household continued to serve as a hub of observation and education. Children and young adults learned the importance of careful attention, timing, and subtle communication. Through ordinary activities, fetching water, tending fires, preparing meals, they developed skills in anticipation, patience, and discernment. These lessons extended outward as the household members engaged with the wider community, applying learned skills in markets, religious gatherings, and social interactions. Ordinary domestic practices became the foundation for broader influence. Her mastery of Thebes' physical environment proved invaluable. She used knowledge of alleyways, courtyards, and city layouts to navigate safely, manage movement, and subtly guide interactions. By understanding how ordinary spaces influenced behavior, she could anticipate human tendencies, avoid conflicts, and create opportunities for discreet intervention. The geography of the city, once mere backdrop, became an instrument of strategy. At times, Timoclea's influence manifested in protective interventions. A merchant at risk of unfair treatment might find assistance in unexpected ways. A neighbor struggling with household management could receive guidance cloaked as casual advice. These actions were small, seemingly ordinary, yet they reinforced her reputation for reliability and foresight. By embedding her influence in everyday acts, she shaped outcomes without drawing attention to her strategic capacity. Leisure and storytelling within her household remained opportunities for subtle education and influence. Narratives were chosen not just for entertainment, but for their lessons in judgment, foresight, and understanding of human behavior. Games were designed to teach timing, anticipation, and pattern recognition. Ordinary moments of play and engagement became exercises in strategy and learning, fostering a household capable of discerning nuance and acting with deliberate thought. Timoclea also observed political and military movements from afar. Though she did not participate directly, the behaviors of soldiers, officials, and city leaders offered insights into hierarchy, priorities, and potential risks. She noted schedules, patrol patterns, and interactions between authorities and citizens, interpreting the ordinary rhythms of governance as data for anticipatory action. Her understanding of human behavior, honed through domestic and social observation, allowed her to assess threats and opportunities without confrontation. Her approach to influence remained understated yet profound. Timoclea's mastery of observation, social intelligence, and environmental awareness allowed her to navigate a complex urban landscape while remaining mostly invisible. Ordinary actions, feeding children, maintaining the household, participating in markets, and engaging in festivals, were interwoven with strategic intent. Her life demonstrated how disciplined attention to mundane details could create extraordinary outcomes. Yet, even as her influence grew, questions remained. How did her interventions ripple through the lives of those around her? Did the merchants, neighbors, and children who learned from her example recognize the subtle guidance shaping their actions? And how many of these quiet, disciplined strategies would remain unrecorded, their lessons hidden in the ordinary rhythms of Thebes? Over time, Timoclea's influence became woven seamlessly into the fabric of Theban life. Though her actions remained largely unseen, the effects of her careful observation, subtle interventions, and disciplined routines rippled outward, shaping behaviors, relationships, and the environment itself. Ordinary life, meals, errands, market visits, and household chores had become channels through which her insight, foresight, and quiet guidance extended beyond the walls of her home. Her household remained a center of learning and adaptation. Children and young adults, trained in observation, patience, and strategic thinking, carried these lessons into their own interactions in the marketplace, neighborhoods, and communal gatherings. They had learned to recognize patterns in human behavior, anticipate consequences, and act with foresight. Ordinary routines, once mundane, were transformed into tools for resilience and influence. Through repetition, attention, and subtle instruction, Timoclea ensured that the next generation could navigate complexity with skill and discretion. The city itself reflected her indirect impact. Merchants adjusted practices after her discreet guidance. Neighbors engaged more thoughtfully with one another, and the ordinary rhythms of urban life subtly shifted in ways that favored careful attention and measured action. Though few knew the source of these changes, the influence was unmistakable in outcomes, disputes resolved quietly, small acts of fairness observed, and everyday interactions guided by unseen hand. Her life illustrated the profound effect that disciplined observation and subtle intervention could have on a community without overt authority. Timoclea's mastery of the environment, both natural and urban, continued to inform her decisions. She monitored the river's flow, seasonal weather patterns, and the movements of animals and people alike, integrating this knowledge into household routines and city interactions. Ordinary observation became a tool for prediction and planning, allowing her to act with confidence and precision. Even the mundane features of Thebes, the placement of market stalls, the incline of streets, or the structure of courtyards, were instruments through which she could exercise influence. Religious and social rituals remained essential avenues for subtle engagement. Timoclea noted who participated, how they behaved, and what priorities these actions revealed. Her careful attention allowed her to navigate political, social, and economic networks with discretion, forming connections and alliances that reinforced her household's security and influence. Ordinary customs became tools for insight, shaping relationships and guiding her interventions. Timoclea's legacy extended to lessons in resilience and strategic thinking. Her approach demonstrated that survival and influence often depended on the careful orchestration of ordinary life, attentive observation, disciplined repetition, and subtle manipulation of social and environmental cues. She taught that extraordinary outcomes could emerge from mundane routines, patience, and the judicious use of knowledge rather than force. Her story highlighted the power inherent in ordinary actions when guided by foresight and strategic intent. Even small gestures had lasting effects. Helping a neighbor navigate daily difficulties, providing subtle advice to a merchant, or offering guidance to a young observer reinforced principles of careful observation, patience, and adaptive thinking. Timoclea's influence permeated ordinary life, demonstrating that intelligence and foresight could be exercised quietly, invisibly, and with profound impact. Each small act of strategic intervention compounded over time, creating a legacy that transcended immediate recognition. Her story also emphasized the role of adaptability. Life in Thebes was unpredictable, with shifting political alliances, social hierarchies, and environmental challenges. Timoclea's approach, careful observation, flexible strategy, and integration of ordinary routines into broader plans, ensured that she and her household could respond effectively to unforeseen changes. Ordinary tasks, when executed with awareness and foresight, became mechanisms for resilience and long-term survival. The culmination of her influence was not a dramatic public acknowledgement, but a quiet transformation of her environment and community. Citizens moved with greater attentiveness, households operated with subtle discipline, and social interactions reflected a pattern of awareness and consideration that had been nurtured indirectly by Timoclea's example. Her legacy was woven into the ordinary fabric of Thebes, unseen, yet powerful, demonstrating that true mastery often lies in subtlety, patience, and the disciplined orchestration of everyday life. Yet questions linger, even as her story reaches its resolution. How many lives were subtly shaped by her interventions? How many individuals carried forward the principles of observation, patience, and strategic awareness without ever knowing their source? And how often does history overlook the quiet triumphs of those who wield influence not through force or spectacle, but through deliberate attention to the ordinary and disciplined execution of strategy? Timoclea's life, marked by intelligence, patience, and subtle orchestration, teaches that extraordinary outcomes often arise from mundane circumstances, disciplined observation, and careful manipulation of both human behavior and environmental cues. Her legacy reminds us that survival, influence, and resilience are not always the product of dramatic action, but of ordinary life approached with awareness, foresight, and deliberate care. Even amid the careful orchestration of her household and the subtle management of Theban life, Timoclea's heart was not untouched by human longing. Love, in its quiet and unpredictable form, found its way into her life, intertwining with survival, patience, and strategy. Unlike the calculated encounters with soldiers or the careful observation of neighbors, love demanded vulnerability, a space where the ordinary rhythms of life collided with the extraordinary currents of emotion. Timoclea's affection began with observation, as was natural to her. She noticed the young scholar who frequented the marketplace, a man known not for wealth or rank, but for his attentive curiosity. He studied scrolls and manuscripts in the city's small library, often pausing to engage merchants and neighbors with thoughtful questions about daily life, history, and human behavior. Unlike others, he approached ordinary tasks with the same attention and quiet care that Timoclea herself had cultivated. It was this reflection of her own deliberate habits and intelligence that first drew her attention. Their first interactions were simple and seemingly ordinary. In the marketplace, a brief exchange over the quality of cloth or the freshness of produce, a casual remark about a rare herb or a recent delivery. Timoclea's observations guided her responses, gentle humor, measured curiosity, and subtle acknowledgement of shared interests. These small moments, repeated over time, created a rhythm that allowed mutual understanding to grow. Love, for her, was less about passion and more about recognition of shared awareness, patience, and intelligence. The scholar, unaware of the full extent of Timoclea's past experiences, found in her a reflection of his own curiosity and careful observation. He was drawn to her calm insight, the way she moved through daily life with quiet confidence and subtle mastery. Timoclea, in turn, appreciated his attentiveness, the way he noticed details others overlooked, and the thoughtfulness of his speech and action. Ordinary interactions became the foundation for something extraordinary, a connection built on shared values and the understated appreciation of observation, patience, and understanding. Their exchanges continued within the rhythms of daily life. Timoclea, while managing her household and observing city life, found moments to converse with him, often under the guise of passing errands, exchanging small tokens, or seeking opinions on mundane matters. Each interaction was deliberate, carefully measured to convey interest without revealing vulnerability. Ordinary gestures, a smile, a brief touch on a bundle of cloth, shared laughter over a market anecdote, became their language of intimacy. Love in Timoclea's world was a slow and deliberate process. She recognized that revealing too much too quickly could invite misunderstanding or risk, yet remaining too distant might prevent connection altogether. The ordinary tasks of life, fetching water, tending fires, arranging meals, offered cover for these interactions, providing moments for subtle communication and shared observation. Love, like strategy, required patience and careful attention. As their connection deepened, the scholar began to notice the deliberate patterns in her life, the careful observation of neighbors, the subtle orchestration of household routines, and the quiet mastery of the city environment. Unlike others who might have found these behaviors intimidating or peculiar, he admired her intelligence, adaptability, and capacity for foresight. Ordinary actions revealed extraordinary character, creating a bond grounded in mutual respect and shared understanding. Timoclea herself experienced a paradoxical tension. She had long relied on careful observation, patience, and subtle manipulation for survival and influence. Yet love introduced unpredictability. The heart's inclinations could not be entirely planned or anticipated. She learned to balance awareness with vulnerability, integrating emotional engagement into her strategic framework. Love became a new dimension of ordinary life, demanding attentiveness and patience, yet offering insights and rewards that extended beyond utility or survival. Their shared moments were often infused with quiet humor. A misplaced jar of water, a miscounted bundle of cloth, or a humorous misunderstanding at the marketplace became opportunities for laughter, recognition, and connection. These small, ordinary occurrences highlighted the human element of love. It was not always dramatic, but it was real, tangible, and quietly transformative. Timoclea, who had mastered patience and observation, found in these moments a sense of companionship, an understanding that complemented her strategic acumen. Even within love, observation remained central. Timoclea noticed his habits, gestures, and choices, not to manipulate, but to understand. She noted how he responded to others, how he approached challenges, and how he balanced curiosity with discretion. Ordinary details, the way he folded scrolls, adjusted his posture, or lingered thoughtfully in conversation, became part of her assessment, ensuring that emotional engagement remained harmonious with the rhythms of daily life. Love, like strategy, was strengthened by awareness. Yet even as affection grew, questions persisted. Could emotional vulnerability coexist with the strategic discipline that had defined her life? Would the slow unfolding of love allow for mutual understanding without compromising the careful balance of her household and influence? And how might this delicate intertwining of affection and awareness shape not only her personal life, but the broader web of relationships she navigated daily? As the seasons passed in Thebes, the relationship between Timoclea and the scholar deepened with quiet rhythm and deliberate attention. Their connection unfolded in subtle ways, integrated seamlessly into the routines of daily life. Unlike the dramatic romances often whispered about in myths, theirs was a slow, attentive, and observational love, built on shared understanding, mutual respect, and the understated joy of ordinary interactions. Morning errands became opportunities for small exchanges. Timoclea would pass by the marketplace, carrying baskets of herbs or containers of water, while the scholar tended his modest stall of scrolls and manuscripts. Their conversations remained seemingly mundane. A comment on the freshness of produce, a question about a rare spice, a shared observation of the ebb and flow of the crowd. But each interaction reinforced familiarity and trust. In these ordinary moments, intimacy grew quietly, almost imperceptibly, like the slow unfurling of a delicate flower. Within her household, Timoclea began to integrate lessons from this relationship. Children and younger members of the home witnessed the subtle interplay of observation, patience, and understanding between the two adults. They saw that affection did not require grand gestures. Instead, it thrived in attentiveness, quiet humor, and shared respect. The ordinary rhythms of domestic life, preparing meals, arranging goods, tending fires, were imbued with small gestures of consideration that mirrored the careful attention she and the scholar offered one another. Love, in this context, became another layer of strategy, not in manipulation, but in the cultivation of harmony, trust, and mutual support. The scholar's presence also extended to social interactions in the neighborhood. Timoclea noticed how he navigated ordinary relationships with merchants, neighbors, and other citizens, demonstrating thoughtfulness, fairness, and attentiveness. These qualities aligned with her own values, creating an unspoken synergy. Together, they became subtle examples of collaboration, patience, and integrity within the community. Ordinary life provided both cover and medium for their bond, allowing their connection to flourish without drawing unnecessary attention. Even in shared leisure, the rhythm of their relationship was deliberate. They exchanged stories and anecdotes, often infused with gentle humor, about ordinary occurrences in the city. A spilled basket of fruit, a miscounted bundle of cloth, or a merchant's exaggerated tale became material for laughter, reflection, and subtle teaching. Through these interactions, the scholar demonstrated patience and attentiveness, qualities Timoclea valued highly. Ordinary life became a scaffold for emotional connection, where observation and small details mattered as much as words or actions. Timoclea also began to notice the effect of this bond on her own emotional landscape. Her experiences of survival, strategy, and careful orchestration had long demanded vigilance, restraint, and calculation. Love, however, introduced moments of vulnerability and spontaneity, small uncertainties that required her to balance careful planning with emotional openness. She learned to navigate this delicate terrain, integrating affection into her disciplined routines without compromising the household's order or her strategic awareness. The scholar, in turn, began to appreciate the depth of Timoclea's mind and the breadth of her experience. He noticed her capacity for observation, her ability to read people and environments, and her subtle orchestration of ordinary life. He admired how she transformed routine tasks into instruments of knowledge, influence, and resilience. These qualities inspired him to reflect on his own actions, habits, and attentiveness, strengthening their shared understanding and reinforcing the mutual respect that underpinned their relationship. Their shared rituals were often small but meaningful. A morning greeting, a brief shared cup of water, the exchange of a folded note about an upcoming market delivery. These ordinary gestures became symbolic markers of connection and trust. Timoclea recognized that extraordinary relationships often thrived not in dramatic declarations, but in the consistency and attentiveness of repeated, everyday interactions. Love, like her other forms of influence, was reinforced through patient repetition and careful attention to detail. The interplay between love and strategy became increasingly evident. Timoclea found that emotional connection offered insights into human behavior she had not previously accessed. Observing her own reactions to affection, understanding the scholar's responses, and navigating mutual expectations provided lessons in empathy, patience, and anticipation. These insights complemented her existing skills in observation and subtle orchestration, demonstrating that love could enhance, rather than detract from, strategic awareness. At the same time, ordinary social and domestic challenges occasionally tested the relationship. Minor disputes over household arrangements, miscommunications in the marketplace, or differences in judgment revealed the need for patience, negotiation, and mutual understanding. Yet, these everyday challenges were approached with the same attentiveness and care that characterized their love: deliberate observation, measured response, and quiet reflection. Ordinary friction became opportunities for learning and strengthening connection rather than sources of conflict. As their bond matured, questions began to emerge. Could this slow, deliberate love endure the unpredictability of life in Thebes? Would their shared attentiveness and mutual respect translate into lasting stability, or would external pressures, political shifts, economic challenges, and social expectations eventually disrupt the harmony they had cultivated? And perhaps most intriguingly, could love itself become a vehicle for extending influence and reinforcing the principles of careful observation, patience, and deliberate action that had defined Timoclea's life? Over time, the bond between Timoclea and the scholar reached a subtle but profound maturity. Their love, built on patience, observation, and shared understanding, became a steady current that shaped both personal and communal life. Unlike dramatic or passionate tales, theirs unfolded quietly, integrated into daily routines, ordinary tasks, and the rhythms of Thebes itself. It was a love that demanded attentiveness, reflection, and gentle negotiation, weaving itself seamlessly into the fabric of ordinary existence. The household, ever the hub of Timoclea's influence, reflected this new dimension of life. Children and younger members witnessed the interplay between affection, observation, and discretion. They observed how two people could engage in intimate connection without disrupting routines or drawing unnecessary attention. Ordinary domestic tasks, preparing meals, arranging goods, tending fires, became shared moments that reinforced the bond. They saw that love could exist quietly alongside responsibility, strategy, and careful orchestration of everyday life. Through this relationship, Timoclea and the scholar subtly influenced the wider community. Ordinary acts, offering assistance to a struggling neighbor, guiding a merchant in a small transaction, sharing knowledge or observation, were now enriched by shared insight. Their collaboration demonstrated the practical power of attentiveness, mutual support, and quiet guidance. Love, though personal, became an instrument of broader influence, showing that emotional bonds could enhance understanding, cooperation, and the subtle shaping of outcomes. Even the marketplace, once a place solely of commerce, became a stage for their shared understanding. They anticipated the needs and reactions of merchants, arranged transactions with subtle humor or clever timing, and noticed small gestures that others overlooked. These ordinary interactions became a canvas on which their bond and shared intelligence were expressed. The city itself began to reflect their influence. Small courtesies became more common, attentiveness was rewarded, and ordinary patterns of human behavior subtly shifted toward patience and reflection. Religious and ceremonial participation took on added nuance. The shared experience of offerings, prayers, and communal events reinforced connection while providing opportunities to observe human behavior. Timoclea and the scholar noted timing, attentiveness, and engagement, learning from each other as much as from the broader community. Love, in this context, was inseparable from insight. It enhanced their capacity to navigate relationships, anticipate behavior, and respond with care. Their shared humor, subtle teasing, and small gestures became the lifeblood of the household. A dropped bundle of herbs, a miscounted measure of grain, or a brief mishap in the courtyard could spark quiet laughter, reinforcing mutual understanding and emotional intimacy. These ordinary moments, repeated and observed carefully, strengthened the bond while modeling patience, attentiveness, and adaptability for the household's younger members. Over time, the scholar grew not only in affection but in awareness, adopting some of Timoclea's methods of observation, patience, and subtle orchestration. Together, they created a household culture that blended emotional connection with practical intelligence. Lessons in foresight, anticipation, and strategy were no longer abstract. They were embedded in daily life, reinforced through both observation and affection. Ordinary routines became a shared medium through which love and influence were simultaneously nurtured. Timoclea's later life demonstrated that love could amplify her broader impact. The quiet synergy of her relationship with the scholar enhanced her ability to navigate social, economic, and environmental networks. Their collaboration allowed for more sophisticated observation, better anticipation of outcomes, and more subtle interventions in daily life. Ordinary tasks, managing the household, interacting with neighbors, attending religious ceremonies, became opportunities to exercise influence, now strengthened by emotional partnership. Yet, even at the height of this quiet harmony, questions remained. How would future generations carry forward these lessons of patience, observation, and subtle influence? Could the principles of careful attention and deliberate action, now intertwined with emotional connection, shape lives beyond the immediate household? And how often are such quiet, deliberate, and emotionally grounded successes overlooked in the broader sweep of history, remembered only in faint traces of ordinary life? Timoclea's story of love, like her earlier acts of strategy and survival, reveals that extraordinary outcomes often emerge from ordinary circumstances. Attention, patience, and subtle orchestration, whether applied to personal safety, social influence, or emotional connection, can shape lives in profound ways. Her bond with the scholar demonstrates that emotional intimacy, when guided by awareness and careful observation, enhances both personal fulfillment and communal influence. In the end, Timoclea's love was a testament to the quiet power of ordinary life. The mundane rhythms of daily tasks, small gestures of attention, and shared understanding of human behavior created a foundation for both affection and influence. Her life, marked by patience, intelligence, and subtle orchestration, teaches that emotional connection and strategic awareness are not opposed. They can coexist, enrich one another, and quietly shape the world around them. Timoclea's life, shaped by observation, strategy, and the quiet unfolding of her relationships, gradually earned her a subtle reputation throughout Thebes. While few knew the full extent of her actions, the clever orchestration of survival, the quiet lessons of patience, and the measured interventions in daily life, the effects of her presence were widely felt. Ordinary citizens, merchants, and neighbors came to recognize her as someone whose influence was steady, reliable, and grounded in subtle intelligence, rather than overt displays of power. The marketplace, always a microcosm of city life, reflected her growing reputation. Merchants adjusted their practices in anticipation of her observations. A carefully measured transaction, the placement of goods, or the timing of deliveries could result in a nod of approval, a quiet smile, or a brief word of guidance from Timoclea. These ordinary signals reinforced her influence. She shaped outcomes not through authority or force, but through the disciplined use of attention, timing, and understanding of human behavior. Her reputation was thus quietly powerful, rooted in the reliability and consistency of her interactions. Neighborhood life similarly bore the imprint of her presence. Residents found themselves subtly guided by her example. Small acts of fairness, careful attention to social norms, and measured intervention in disputes. Her household operated as a model of disciplined observation and thoughtful action, demonstrating how ordinary routines could be conducted with intelligence and foresight. Children and younger members of other households learned, often unconsciously, to mirror the patience, attentiveness, and subtle problem-solving they observed. Timoclea's influence spread organically, quietly shaping behaviors across her community. Even in public ceremonies and religious rituals, her reputation had an effect. The ways she participated, attentively, with quiet respect, and yet with discernible awareness of social dynamics, marked her as someone both thoughtful and perceptive. Observers took note of her timing, her attentiveness to ritual, and her careful engagement with others, drawing subtle lessons from her comportment. Ordinary acts of participation became a stage for the demonstration of insight and influence, reinforcing her reputation as someone who navigated social, political, and spiritual life with discretion and intelligence. Timoclea's approach to legacy was deliberate. She understood that history rarely honors quiet competence and subtle orchestration, yet she continued to invest her energy in fostering resilience, patience, and observation in those around her. Household members, children, and neighbors absorbed lessons not through formal teaching, but through lived example. The careful tending of daily routines attentive observation of social dynamics, and patient management of minor conflicts. These ordinary lessons became the invisible threads through which her influence extended across time and space. Her environmental awareness also contributed to her legacy. She noted seasonal cycles, river flows, and the rhythms of urban life, integrating this knowledge into both household management and community engagement. Ordinary patterns of nature and human activity became data she could interpret to anticipate needs, respond to threats, and guide her actions. By embedding this awareness in daily life, she created a framework for understanding and influencing the ordinary world. A framework that could be observed, learned, and carried forward by those who followed her example. The scholar, her companion and confidant, played a role in shaping this reputation. Through shared observation and subtle collaboration, he reinforced her influence in ordinary interactions. Their joint attentiveness, measured engagement, and gentle guidance became an unspoken lesson for others. Emotional connection and strategic intelligence could coexist and even enhance one another. The household's daily life became both a model and a mechanism for quiet influence, demonstrating that personal relationships could support broader social impact without overt displays of authority. Her reputation also intersected with civic life in understated ways. While she did not hold formal authority, her insight into human behavior, economic activity, and social patterns made her a resource. Known to some as a quiet advisor, to others as a reliable observer, ordinary problems, disputes between merchants, minor conflicts between neighbors, logistical challenges in ceremonies, often found resolution through her discreet interventions. Thebes itself became subtly shaped by her presence, a city influenced not by proclamation, but by patient observation, strategic attention, and ordinary acts carried out with extraordinary awareness. At the heart of her legacy was the principle that small, disciplined actions compound over time. A carefully timed word, an attentive gesture, or a quiet demonstration of fairness had effects that rippled beyond immediate observation. These ordinary acts, repeated and measured, reinforced patterns of behavior that shaped relationships, interactions, and expectations within the community. Timoclea's influence was neither visible nor dramatic, yet it was pervasive, quietly structuring ordinary life in ways that echoed far beyond her immediate household. Yet questions persisted. How many citizens of Thebes truly understood the breadth of her influence? Would the lessons she embedded in ordinary routines endure across generations, or would they dissolve into the unnoticed rhythms of daily life? And how might future observers interpret the life of someone whose triumphs were defined not by spectacle, but by subtlety, patience, and the disciplined orchestration of ordinary moments? As years passed, Timoclea's influence deepened, extending beyond the immediate walls of her household into the wider network of Thebes. Her quiet presence and disciplined orchestration of daily life allowed her to touch lives in subtle ways that often went unnoticed, yet the effects were tangible. The ordinary routines of merchants, neighbors, and even city officials began to bear traces of her careful observation and thoughtful interventions, creating a legacy rooted in subtlety and attentiveness rather than formal authority. In the marketplace, her impact was particularly evident. Merchants who had once relied solely on speed or volume began to notice patterns in Timoclea's measured interactions. A nod of approval for precision, a word of guidance for attention to detail, or a subtle demonstration of fairness in exchange. These ordinary, almost imperceptible cues shaped behavior over time, encouraging diligence, patience, and thoughtfulness. Her influence, embedded in everyday interactions, demonstrated that long-term effect often arises not from dramatic gestures, but from consistent, measured engagement. Neighborhood relations similarly reflected her growing reputation. Residents observed how her household operated with quiet efficiency, fairness, and subtle intervention in small disputes. Children absorbed lessons in patience, observation, and practical intelligence, learning that attentiveness and discretion could shape outcomes more effectively than impulsive action or overt authority. Ordinary life itself became the medium through which these lessons were transmitted, creating a ripple effect across households and social circles. Timoclea's participation in religious ceremonies and civic events reinforced her subtle influence. She observed and engaged in rituals with attentiveness and discretion, noting the behavior of others while contributing to communal cohesion. Ordinary acts, timely participation, measured offerings, and careful adherence to custom became markers of competence and reliability. Observers learned from her example that influence could be exercised quietly, and that thoughtful engagement with ordinary social and spiritual practices could shape perception, trust, and social dynamics. Her household continued to serve as a center of both education and subtle influence. Younger members were trained not only in practical skills, tending fires, preparing food, maintaining the household, but also in observation, patience, and strategic awareness. Ordinary tasks became exercises in foresight and understanding, noting patterns, anticipating consequences, and acting with discretion. By embedding these lessons in daily life, Timoclea ensured that the next generation would carry forward principles of careful attention, resilience, and subtle influence. The scholar, her companion and confidant, also played a role in amplifying her legacy. Together, they modeled collaboration, mutual respect, and the integration of emotional awareness with strategic thinking. Their relationship illustrated that influence and affection could coexist, reinforcing lessons of attentiveness, patience, and reflection. Ordinary acts of partnership, shared tasks, subtle guidance, and quiet humor demonstrated the power of combining personal connection with practical intelligence, leaving an indelible impression on those around them. Timoclea's influence was not limited to social interactions. Her understanding of the environment, urban layout, and natural rhythms of Thebes enabled her to anticipate challenges and opportunities with remarkable precision. Seasonal changes, river currents, street layouts, and the timing of deliveries became data points for decision-making. By integrating this knowledge into her daily routines and household management, she subtly shaped the experiences of those around her, ensuring that ordinary life proceeded with greater predictability, efficiency, and safety. As her reputation solidified, whispers of her skill and insight began to circulate among more distant circles of Theban society. Though she rarely sought recognition, her reliability and discernment became known to merchants, civic leaders, and neighbors alike. Ordinary people came to trust her judgment, seeking guidance in matters as varied as minor disputes, household management, and even the coordination of small events. Her influence, grounded in patience and subtle orchestration, extended far beyond what could be observed at first glance. At the core of her legacy was the principle that ordinary life, when attended to with awareness and deliberate care, could yield extraordinary outcomes. Small, repeated actions, careful observation, measured guidance, subtle interventions, and consistent adherence to principle created a web of influence that shaped both individual lives and community dynamics. Timoclea's approach demonstrated that quiet, disciplined attention to the mundane aspects of life could achieve effects as lasting and meaningful as any dramatic act of power. Yet even as her influence grew, questions lingered. How would these subtle lessons be remembered by future generations? Would the quiet rhythms of her household, the disciplined observation, and the patient cultivation of relationships leave a trace beyond the immediate circle of those she touched? And could the ordinary acts of attentiveness and care, repeated over decades, truly outlast the ephemeral nature of human memory, becoming a legacy in the truest sense? Timoclea's life, when viewed in its entirety, revealed a legacy quietly interwoven into the fabric of Theban society. Her influence, shaped by observation, patience, and subtle orchestration, extended far beyond the boundaries of her household. Though few could recount her story in full, the rhythms of daily life, the behaviors of neighbors, and the habits of merchants and civic leaders bore the imprint of her disciplined attentiveness. Her household remained the epicenter of this quiet power. Children, and younger adults who had grown up under her guidance carried forward lessons in observation, patience, and careful intervention. They understood, often instinctively, that ordinary actions, measured gestures, thoughtful words, attentive listening, could shape outcomes in profound ways. These lessons, absorbed through example rather than formal instruction, ensured that the principles Timoclea embodied would persist long after she had stepped back from active involvement in city life. Merchants and neighbors continued to demonstrate behaviors shaped subtly by her influence. Transactions were executed with care, disputes were handled with thoughtfulness, and ordinary acts of daily life reflected the values she had modeled. While her name might not have been spoken, the effects of her strategic observation and gentle guidance were everywhere present. Thebes itself, in microcosm, reflected the quiet rhythm of her life. Ordinary routines carried out with mindfulness and deliberate care shaped community dynamics more effectively than overt authority ever could. Her partnership with the scholar, strengthened over decades, illustrated how love and strategy could coexist. Their relationship served as a living example of how emotional connection could enhance influence, observation, and decision-making. Shared attentiveness, mutual support, and the gentle intertwining of affection with practical intelligence created a model for households throughout the city. Observers, even those unaware of the depth of their connection, noticed the harmony, patience, and subtle guidance evident in their interactions. Timoclea's impact extended to religious and civic spheres as well. Her consistent participation, careful attention to social norms, and measured engagement influenced rituals, ceremonies, and civic practices. Ordinary acts, timely attendance, considered offerings, and thoughtful participation reinforced patterns of reliability, respect, and attentiveness. While she did not seek recognition, her actions shaped social expectations and subtly elevated standards of conduct, demonstrating that influence need not be dramatic to be enduring. Even environmental awareness contributed to her legacy. Timoclea monitored seasonal cycles, river flows, and urban patterns, integrating this knowledge into household management, city interactions, and personal planning. Ordinary observations of weather, animal behavior, or street activity became tools for anticipating challenges, guiding decisions, and supporting the resilience of those around her. By embedding such awareness in daily life, she created a foundation for sustained influence that extended beyond immediate perception. Her story exemplified the principle that extraordinary effects often emerge from ordinary circumstances. The deliberate practice of observation, patience, and subtle intervention created a web of influence that touched countless lives, often invisibly. Timoclea demonstrated that power need not be overt, that survival and resilience could be achieved through quiet discipline, and that emotional connection could enhance strategic effectiveness rather than undermine it. Her life illustrated that mastery of ordinary life, its routines, interactions, and rhythms, could leave a legacy as profound as any public triumph. Timoclea's legacy also raised enduring questions. How many lives were quietly shaped by her interventions without ever realizing it? To what extent did the lessons of patience, attentiveness, and subtle influence persist across generations? And how often does history overlook the extraordinary accomplishments embedded in ordinary life, celebrating spectacle while leaving subtle mastery unrecognized? Ultimately, Timoclea's life reminds us that influence, survival, and even love can be exercised quietly, patiently, and with careful attention to ordinary details. Her story demonstrates that human resilience and strategic intelligence often manifest not in dramatic gestures, but in small, repeated actions that ripple outward over time. The ordinary, when approached with awareness and deliberate care, becomes extraordinary. In the quiet streets of Thebes, in the rhythms of daily chores, and in the measured actions of those she touched, Timoclea's influence persisted, proof that legacy is not always about recognition, but about the subtle shaping of lives, communities, and patterns of behavior. Her story teaches that patient observation, disciplined action, and quiet understanding are among the most enduring and transformative forces in human history.